Modern Queen Tales presents The Kingdom Maker's Vow. Chapter 1: The Dust and the Diamonds. The air in the upscale Manhattan restaurant smelled of white truffles, aged oak, and old money. It was a stark, almost suffocating contrast to the scent of the sun-baked earth and monsoon rains I had grown accustomed to over the last 3 years in Nairobi. I sat at the corner booth of Le Ciel, wearing a simple, unbranded linen dress I had purchased at a local market before my flight. My hair was tied back in a plain clasp, my face free of makeup. I hadn't bothered to dress up for Quentin. I had thought, rather foolishly, that after 3 years of maintaining a long-distance relationship while I built schools and funded agricultural programs in East Africa, he would just be happy to see me. I was wrong. Quentin MacKay, heir to MacKay Enterprises, sat across from me, looking at my linen dress as if it were an infectious disease. His tailored Armani suit seemed to act as a physical barrier between us. "Hanna," he sighed, checking his Patek Philippe watch for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. "I really wish you had told me you were coming back today. I would have sent an assistant to take you shopping before this." He gestured vaguely at my entire being. "I wanted to surprise you," I said evenly, keeping my voice neutral. I took a sip of my sparkling water. "I finished my charity initiatives early. The foundations are self-sustaining now." "Right." "The charity work." Quentin's upper lip curled slightly. "Look, Hanna, you've been gone for 3 years playing savior in the dirt. Things here have changed. I have changed. I'm stepping up as the vice president of MacKay Enterprises next month. I can't be seen with a woman whose greatest ambition is digging wells for pennies." I set my glass down. The ice clinked softly against the crystal. "Are you breaking up with me, Quentin?" Before he could answer, the sharp, rhythmic clicking of stiletto heels echoed across the marble floor. A heavy cloud of Chanel No. 5 announced her arrival before she even spoke. "Quentin, darling, I thought you'd be done with the charity case by now." A woman slid into the booth beside Quentin, pressing her body against his arm. She was striking, in a heavily manufactured way, perfect blonde blowout, a dress that cost more than a mid-sized sedan, and a diamond tennis bracelet that caught the restaurant's ambient lighting. I recognized her immediately. Sydney Carter. Her family owned the largest logistics firm on the East Coast. Quentin didn't even have the grace to look guilty. He wrapped an arm around Sydney's waist. "Hanna, this is Sydney, my fiancé." "Fiancé," I repeated. The word tasted like ash, but strangely. It just made me cold. "We were still together yesterday when you texted me good morning. Oh, please." Sydney laughed, a high, tinkling sound meant to draw the attention of the surrounding tables. "Quentin told me all about you, the penniless do-gooder who thinks love can pay the bills. Look around, sweetie, you don't belong here. Quentin needs a woman with status, an elite family to merge with. Not a girl who smells like mosquito repellent." Several heads turned toward our table. Whispers broke out among the socialites dining nearby. "Isn't that the MacKay heir? Who is that drab girl with him? A maid?" Sydney Carter put her in her place. "Good riddance." Quentin tossed a $100 bill onto the table. "Buy yourself a cab ride back to whatever hostel you're staying in, Hanna." "Quentin." "It's over. Please don't contact my office. My security has your photo." They stood up together, a picture-perfect couple of high society, and walked out of the restaurant, leaving me sitting alone in a sea of mocking whispers. I looked at the $100 bill resting on the pristine white tablecloth. Slowly, a genuine smile crept onto my face. If only Quentin knew. He thought I had spent the last 3 years in Africa doing lowly volunteer work because I had no money. He didn't know that the charity was just a front. A way to stay out of the public eye, while I managed the largest flow of capital the global markets had ever seen. My name is Hanna Isaacs. But to the elite circle of global finance, the prime ministers, the tech billionaires, and the old money patriarchs who ruled the world, I was known simply as the Kingdom Maker. I was the sole CEO and founder of the Orbis Conglomerate. I created the economies that allowed families like the MacKays to pretend they were powerful. I picked up the $100 bill, left it as a tip for the waiter, and walked out into the crisp New York night. Chapter 2. The Contract. The rain started the moment I stepped onto the pavement. I didn't have an umbrella, and my driver wasn't scheduled to pick me up for another hour, as I had expected dinner with Quentin to last longer. I stood beneath the awning of the restaurant, pulling my thin jacket tighter around my shoulders. "Miss, you're blocking the valet." I turned. Standing a few feet away, sheltered beneath a massive black umbrella held by a stoic bodyguard, was a man who seemed to absorb the light around him. He was tall, with sharp aristocratic features, piercing gray eyes, and an aura of absolute authority. He wore a bespoke three-piece suit that made Quentin's Armani look like child's play. I recognized him, though we had never formally met. Sean Young, CEO of Young Corporation, a massive tech and real estate conglomerate. He was notoriously ruthless, fiercely private, and entirely self-made. "My apologies," I said, stepping aside. I met his imposing stare with absolute calm. Sean paused. His eyes swept over me, taking in my damp linen dress, my lack of jewelry, and the utter absence of panic in my demeanor. Most people practically bowed when Sean Young looked at them. I just waited for him to pass. "You were just publicly humiliated inside," Sean said, his voice a low, smooth baritone. "It wasn't a question. I was at the table behind yours. MacKay and the Carter heiress. They were loud. They usually are," I replied mildly. "Empty vessels make the most noise." A flicker of genuine amusement danced in Sean's gray eyes. He waved his bodyguard away, taking the umbrella himself and stepping closer to me, shielding us both from the downpour. "Most women would be in tears, or screaming," Sean observed. "I don't waste tears on bad investments," I said. Sean stared at me for a long moment, the silence stretching between us, filled only by the sound of the rain hitting the canvas above. "What is your name?" "Hanna Isaacs." "Hanna," he tested the name on his tongue. "I am in need of a wife, Hanna." I blinked. It was perhaps the first time in a decade I had been genuinely caught off guard. "Excuse me?" "My board of directors is pressuring me to settle down to stabilize our stock prices. My family is constantly parading shallow, money-hungry socialites in front of me, women exactly like Sydney Carter," Sean explained, his tone strictly business. "I need a shield, a woman who won't be intimidated by my world, who won't ask for my heart, and who can stand tall when the vultures circle." "You just took the air of MacKay Enterprises dismantling your life in stride without blinking. You're exactly what I need. You are proposing a contract marriage, I deduced. 2 years. In exchange, I will provide you with absolute financial security, a platinum-tier lifestyle, and protection from Quentin MacKay or anyone else who tries to cross you. At the end of the term, you walk away with $50 million. It was a generous offer for a supposedly penniless charity worker. But for me, the Kingdom Maker, $50 million was what my syndicate made in the time it took me to drink a cup of coffee. Yet, as I looked into Sean's eyes, I saw an opportunity. Reintegrating into New York's high society as the Kingdom Maker immediately would cause a global market panic. I needed a quiet cover for a few months while I restructured my North American assets. Being the lowly wife of Sean Young would provide the perfect camouflage. No one would look twice at me. Furthermore, there was something about Sean, a quiet honor beneath his ruthless reputation. He had respected my composure. "I don't need your $50 million, Mr. Young," I said, "but I will accept your proposal on one condition. You do not pry into my personal business, and you trust me when the time comes." Sean raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my rejection of the money, but he extended his hand. "Deal." Chapter 3. Marrying Down. The wedding was swift, efficient, and entirely private. We signed the papers at City Hall, followed by a quiet dinner at his penthouse. Sean was a gentleman, offering me the master suite while he took the guest wing. We were partners, not lovers. However, the news of Sean Young's marriage leaked to the press within 48 hours. The societal fallout was spectacular. The elite circles of the city went into a frenzy. Sean Young, the most eligible untouchable bachelor, had married a nobody. A girl with no family backing, no trust fund, and no pedigree. A week after our wedding, Sean and I attended a high society charity auction. It was part of our contract. I had to appear by his side. Sean had bought me a stunning, understated emerald green gown by an independent designer. It wasn't flashy, but it fit me perfectly. The moment we walked into the ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria, the temperature seemed to drop. Eyes darted toward us. Fans snapped open to hide whispering mouths. Sean placed a warm hand on the small of my back. "Ignore them," he murmured near my ear. "They're just noise." "I'm used to noise," I replied softly. We hadn't been there 20 minutes before trouble found us. I was standing near the champagne tower, while Sean was cornered by a senator. Well, if it isn't the city's most famous gold digger. I turned to see Sydney Carter, dripping in diamonds, clutching Quentin's arm. Quentin looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and deep, simmering rage. "Hanna," Quentin sneered, "I have to hand it to you. I dump you for being a classless nobody, and you immediately run out and trick Sean Young into marrying you. How did you do it? Threaten him with a scandal? Quentin, look at her dress." Sydney mocked, her voice loud enough to draw a crowd. Not even a recognized label. Sean Young must be deeply embarrassed to parade around a placeholder wife. "She probably still has dirt under her fingernails from her little charity trips." "You should leave, Hanna," Quentin said, his chest puffed out. "You're polluting the air for the real elites. Sean is going to realize what a liability you are and throw you back into the gutter where I found you." The crowd gathered closer, waiting for me to break down, to cry, to run. Instead, I took a slow sip of my champagne. "Quentin, your tie is crooked. And Sydney, that diamond necklace is a VS2 clarity at best. If you're going to pretend to be elite, at least buy flawless stones." Sydney gasped, her hand flying to her neck. Quentin stepped forward, his face red with anger. "You little, is there a problem here?" Sean's voice cut through the tension like a whip. He stepped beside me, his presence instantly dominating the space. He looked at me, checking to see if I was all right. "Sean," Quentin said, forcing a laugh. "We were just catching up with your wife, giving her some pointers on how to behave in polite society." Sean finally turned his gaze to Quentin, and the temperature in the room plummeted further. "My wife needs no pointers from a man who inherited his title and a woman who bought her manners. Hanna is exactly where she belongs, by my side. If either of you speaks to her with disrespect again, I will make sure MacKay Enterprises loses its shipping contracts with the Asian markets before breakfast. Am I understood?" Quentin paled. Sydney shrank back. The surrounding crowd suddenly found their drinks fascinating. "Come, Hanna," Sean said, offering me his arm. "The air here has grown foul." As we walked away, I looked up at Sean. "You didn't have to threaten his shipping contracts." "He disrespected my wife," Sean said simply, his jaw tight. "I take my contracts seriously, Hanna, both in business and in marriage." A strange warmth fluttered in my chest. Sean Young was a man of his word. Chapter 4. The Kingdom Maker Awakens. The humiliation at the auction did not deter Quentin and Sydney. It only fueled their venom. Unable to attack me directly while Sean was present, they decided to attack the shield itself. They went after Young Corp. Because of our marriage, society deemed Sean to have weakened his position by not allying with a powerful family. Quentin convinced his father to aggressively target Sean's supply chains, buying out manufacturers and bribing logistics companies to delay Young Corp's materials. Sydney's family, the Carters, restricted Sean's access to their shipping routes. Meanwhile, I had taken a job as a mid-level data analyst at one of Sean's subsidiary firms. It was a quiet office where I could sit at a computer and securely access my syndicate's encrypted network while appearing to work a lowly job. Sydney, somehow finding out where I worked, made it her mission to torment me. She would show up at the subsidiary with her socialite friends, demanding tours, spilling lattes on my desk, and loudly complaining to the manager that I was incompetent. "It's a shame, mister." Young has to employ his charity case wife out of pity, Sydney sneered one Tuesday, dropping a stack of files onto my keyboard. "I hear Young Corp's stock is dipping." Maybe if he hadn't married a parasite, he could have fought off Quentin. I calmly wiped the spilled coffee from my desk. "Are you finished, Miss Carter?" "I'm just getting started," she hissed. "Quentin is going to crush Sean. And when Sean is bankrupt, he'll divorce you, and you'll be back to nothing." She sashayed out of the office. My manager, a nervous man, walked over. "Hanna, please. Just apologize to her next time. She's a Carter." "Don't worry," I said softly. "She won't be a problem much longer." That evening, I returned to the penthouse. Sean was in his study, his tie loosened, a glass of scotch in his hand as he stared at a wall of glowing monitors. He looked exhausted. The MacKay-Carter alliance was taking a toll. I knocked gently. "Rough day?" Sean ran a hand through his hair, offering a tired smile. "Just a minor hurdle. MacKay is playing dirty, but don't worry about it, Hanna. I promise to protect you, and I will." You could divorce me," I said, testing him. "If you dissolve the contract, the MacKays will back off. You could marry an heiress. Save your company." Sean's eyes hardened. He set his glass down and walked over to me, stopping only inches away. "I built this company from the ground up. I don't need a spoiled heiress to save it. And I don't break my vows." "You are my wife. We stand together, or not at all." He meant it, every word. My heart, which had been frozen since Quentin's betrayal, cracked open just a fraction. Sean was fighting a war for a woman he thought was a penniless charity worker. It was time to level the playing field. I went to my room, locked the door, and opened my encrypted laptop. The black screen glowed with the emblem of the Orbis Conglomerate, a golden crown over a sword. I dialed my chief of operations in Geneva. "Lady Hanna," his voice came through the secure line. "We have been waiting for your orders." "The hibernation period is over," I commanded, my voice dropping the soft, gentle tone I used in public and adopting the steel of the Kingdom Maker. "Begin Phase 1. Quietly buy up the debts of the Carter logistics firm. Do not alert them. Furthermore, contact the European suppliers for MacKay Enterprises. Tell them the Orbis Conglomerate strongly suggests they double their tariffs on all MacKay imports." "Understood. Will we be making a public move soon?" "Yes," I said, my eyes gleaming in the dark room. "Quentin MacKay is hosting the Centennial Gala next week. I want you to leak a rumor to the press. Tell them the Kingdom Maker will be attending." Chapter 5. The Trap. The rumor hit high society like a localized earthquake. The Kingdom Maker, the phantom billionaire who had single-handedly bailed out the Bank of England, the investor who could make or break a Fortune 500 company with a text message, was coming to New York. And she was attending the MacKay Centennial Gala. Quentin and Sydney were ecstatic. They believed their aggressive business tactics had attracted the Kingdom Maker's attention. They bragged to anyone who would listen that the conglomerate was coming to partner with MacKay Enterprises. Sean, however, was tense as we rode in the back of his Maybach toward the gala. "Keep close to me tonight, Hanna," Sean said, adjusting his cuffs. "Quentin is going to try to humiliate us. He invited us specifically to show off in front of the Kingdom Maker." He wants to prove he's the alpha in the room. I'm not afraid of Quentin, I said, adjusting the bodice of my dress. Tonight, I had commissioned a custom dress from a master atelier in Paris. It was midnight blue silk, embroidered with crushed diamonds that shimmered like stars. A necklace of flawless, deep ocean sapphires rested against my collarbone. Sean had stared at me for a full minute when I walked out of my room, instead of asking how I afforded it. He simply offered his arm and said I looked breathtaking. We arrived at the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel. The room was a sea of tuxedos, glittering gowns, and desperate ambition. Every major CEO, politician, and socialite was present, their eyes darting toward the VIP entrance, waiting for the Kingdom Maker. Quentin and Sydney stood at the center of the room, holding court. When they saw us enter, a malicious grin spread across Quentin's face. He grabbed a microphone from the bandstand. "Ladies and gentlemen," Quentin's voice boomed over the speakers. The room quieted. "Welcome. Tonight is a night of celebration for MacKay Enterprises. We are expecting a very special guest soon. But before she arrives, I'd like to acknowledge some of our lesser guests." The spotlight swung wildly and landed squarely on Sean and me. "Sean Young," Quentin sneered into the mic, "CEO of a sinking ship. Tell me, Sean, how much did your stock drop today? 5%? 10? It's a tragedy what happens when a man loses his focus. When he decides to marry the help instead of an equal." Sydney laughed into the microphone. "Honestly, Hanna, did you rent those sapphires? Or did you steal them from one of your little charity drives?" The crowd murmured. Some laughed. It was a brutal, public execution of our social standing. Sean's grip on my waist tightened. I could feel the fury radiating from him. He stepped forward to take the microphone, to defend me as he always did, but I placed a hand gently on his chest. "Wait," I whispered. "Hanna, I won't let them do this to you," he ground out. "Trust me," I said, looking up into his gray eyes. "Remember our contract? Trust me when the time comes. The time is now." I stepped out of the spotlight and began walking slowly toward the center of the room, toward Quentin and Sydney. The crowd parted for me, confused by my calm demeanor. I walked with the posture of a queen inspecting her subjects. "What are you doing, Hanna?" Quentin snapped, lowering the mic. "Go back to your corner. You're embarrassing yourself." At that exact moment, the heavy oak doors of the ballroom burst open. 4 men in immaculate black suits walked in, moving with terrifying military precision. They were my elite security detail from the conglomerate. The room fell dead silent. Everyone recognized the gold crown and sword pins on their lapels. The head of security, a towering man named Marcus, walked directly toward the center of the room. He completely ignored Quentin and Sydney, passing them as if they were statues. He stopped directly in front of me and bowed deeply at the waist. "Lady Hanna," Marcus said, his voice carrying perfectly in the silent ballroom. "The European acquisitions are complete. The Carter debts have been called in. We await your next command." Someone in the crowd dropped a champagne glass. It shattered, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. Quentin's face went entirely slack. The color drained from Sydney's cheeks until she looked like a ghost. What is this?" Quentin stammered, looking from Marcus to me. "What is he calling you?" I reached out and plucked the microphone from Quentin's trembling hand. I turned to face the hundreds of elites who had whispered about me, mocked me, and looked down on me. "Good evening," I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Quentin promised you the Kingdom Maker tonight. I apologize for keeping you waiting. I was busy letting my husband's enemies dig their own graves." Chapter 6. The Fall. The silence was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes a tsunami. "You?" Sydney whispered, her voice cracking. "You're the Kingdom Maker? That's impossible. You're a charity worker. You were covered in dust." "I build infrastructure in developing nations because I own the banks that fund them, Sydney," I said coldly. I turned to the crowd. For the past month, MacKay Enterprises and Carter Logistics have attempted a hostile blockade against Young Corp. They did this believing Sean Young was weak because he married me. I began to pace the stage, the diamonds on my dress catching the light. Let me make one thing perfectly clear to everyone in this room. Sean Young is under the absolute, undisputed protection of the Orbis Conglomerate. Anyone who sells a single share of his stock, anyone who denies him a contract, answers to me. I turned back to Quentin, whose knees were visibly shaking. As for you, Quentin, I said softly, but the microphone carried every word. You thought I was beneath you. You thought your inherited wealth made you a god. But wealth is an illusion, Quentin. It only exists because people like me allow it to. I snapped my fingers. Marcus stepped forward with an iPad and handed it to Quentin. Check your family's accounts, I ordered. Quentin stared at the screen. A choked sob escaped his throat. Our credit lines. The European suppliers. They've all pulled out. Our shares. I initiated a massive short sell on MacKay Enterprises an hour ago. I explained clinically. Combined with the supplier tariffs I enacted, your company is currently in a liquidity crisis. You are bankrupt, Quentin. As of tomorrow morning, MacKay Enterprises will cease to exist. And Sydney? Sydney flinched as I looked at her. I bought all of Carter Logistics' outstanding debt. I am calling it in immediately. Your family's company now belongs to the conglomerate. We're liquidating the trucks for scrap. Hanna, please. Quentin fell to his knees, not caring about his tailored suit, not caring about the hundreds of people watching. He reached out to grab the hem of my dress. I'm sorry. I was a fool. I loved you, remember? We were together. Please don't do this. I stepped back, pulling my dress away from his grasp, as if he were diseased. You didn't love me, Quentin. You loved the reflection of your own ego. You threw me away because I didn't fit your aesthetic. Now, you don't fit mine. The business partners and politicians who had been laughing with Quentin 5 minutes ago were already backing away. They were pulling out their phones, frantically calling their brokers to sever all ties with the MacKays and the Carters. In the span of 5 minutes, Quentin and Sydney had gone from the apex of high society to complete untouchables. I handed the microphone to Marcus and walked down the steps of the stage. The crowd parted for me again. But this time, nobody was whispering insults. Men bowed their heads. Women averted their eyes in deference. I was no longer the placeholder wife. I was the architect of their universe. I walked straight to where Sean was standing. For the first time since I met him, the great Sean Young looked completely stunned. His gray eyes were wide, scanning my face as if trying to reconcile the quiet woman who ate takeout on his couch with the financial titan who had just executed 2 corporate empires without blinking. Hanna, he breathed. I believe we have a contract, Mr. Young, I said, a small genuine smile touching my lips. Shall we go home? The air here has grown foul. A slow, brilliant smile broke across Sean's face. It transformed him, wiping away the coldness and leaving only a fierce, burning admiration. He offered me his arm, bowing his head slightly. Lead the way, my wife. Chapter 7, The Vow. We rode back to the penthouse in silence, but the air between us was electric. The quiet rain of New York tapped against the tinted windows of the Maybach. When we entered the penthouse, I kicked off my heels and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Looking out over the glittering skyline of the city, I owned a significant percentage of the buildings I was looking at. I heard Sean pour 2 glasses of scotch. He walked over and handed me one. So, Sean said, leaning against the glass next to me, the Kingdom Maker, are you angry? I asked, looking down at the amber liquid.
I deceived you.
I let you fight my battles and stress over your company when I could have ended it with a phone call. Sean took a sip of his drink, his eyes fixed on me. Hanna, when I met you in the rain, I knew you were someone special. I saw a woman with a spine of steel, I didn't care if you were a billionaire or a beggar. I married you because of who you are in here." He tapped his chest, over his heart. "You defended me," I said softly. "Even when you thought I was a liability, even when it cost you. No one has ever done that for me. Everyone only ever wanted my money, or my status. You just wanted me to be safe." Sean reached out and gently tucked a stray lock of hair behind my ear. His touch sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "I told you I needed a wife who wouldn't flinch," Sean murmured, stepping closer. The space between us vanished. "I didn't know I was marrying a queen, but I am infinitely proud to stand by your side. The contract is for 2 years." I reminded him, my voice barely a whisper. Sean took the glass from my hand and set it on a nearby table, along with his own. He placed both his hands on my waist, pulling me flush against him. "I'm tearing up the contract," he said fiercely, his eyes dark with an emotion that made my breath catch. "I don't want 2 years, Hanna. I want 50. I want a lifetime." I looked up into the face of the man who had sheltered me in the storm, who had stood between me and the world's cruelty without knowing I held the world in my hands. "A lifetime is a very long investment, Mr. Young," I smiled. "I'm willing to risk it," he said, right before his lips crashed down onto mine. The kiss was everything Quentin had never been: passionate, protective, and overwhelmingly real. The Kingdom Maker was used to conquering markets, breaking empires, and demanding submission. But here, in the arms of Sean Young, I finally found a kingdom I was happy to surrender to. Tomorrow, the financial world would wake up to a new reality. The MacKays would be destitute, the Carters would be forgotten, and the name Hanna Young would be whispered with reverence in boardrooms across the globe. But tonight, the Kingdom Maker was simply a woman, finally, exactly where she belonged.
Modern Queen Tales presents The Tempest Respite, Chapter 1, The Dull Edge of Peacetime. The crystal chandeliers of the imperial palace of Pax Abundantia cast a light so brilliant it made my eyes ache. For 7 years, the only illumination I had known after dark was the flicker of campfires, the sudden, violent flash of cannon fire, and the cold gleam of the moon over a battlefield scattered with the fallen. Here, in the heart of the capital, the air smelled of imported jasmine perfume, roasted pheasant, and expensive wine. I found myself missing the honest scent of pine needles and horse sweat. I stood near the edge of the grand ballroom, my spine straight as a musket barrel, wearing a gown of midnight blue silk that felt heavier than my chainmail. I was Kiara Remington. To the soldiers on the northern front, I was the Tempest bringer, the youngest general in the history of the Empire, the woman who had broken the siege of Viridian and driven the Highland barbarians back across the frozen sea. But to the perfumed lords and ladies whispering behind their feather fans, I was an anomaly, a curiosity. A woman who had forgotten her place, and, as I was about to find out, a woman who had outlived her usefulness. Kiara, the voice belonged to Arthur Octavius. My fiancé. I turned, expecting to see the warm, admiring smile he had always reserved for me in his letters. Instead, his handsome face was set in a mask of practiced regret. Arthur was a rising star in the Ministry of Defense, a man whose battles were fought with ink and treaties rather than steel and blood. He wore a perfectly tailored suit of pale gray velvet, the silver embroidery catching the chandelier light. Beside him stood Lady Natalia, a woman who looked exactly like the porcelain dolls favored by the aristocrats. She was small, soft, and draped in pastel pink, her wide blue eyes looking at me with a mixture of pity and veiled triumph. "Arthur," I said, my voice steady, though a tactical instinct in my gut, the same instinct that warned me of ambushes, flared to life. You requested my presence away from the receiving line. I did, he said, his voice carrying just enough volume to ensure the nearby nobles, who had conveniently stopped their chatter, could hear every word. Kiara, we must speak of our future, or rather, the lack of it. Explain. Arthur sighed, a theatrical sound that grated on my nerves. You must understand, Kiara. When we were betrothed, we were children. The war changed everything. It changed you. Look at you. He gestured vaguely at my imposing posture, the faint silver scar that traced the line of my jaw, a gift from an enemy saboteur. You are a hero to Pax Abundantia, yes. But you are a soldier. You are hard, cold, and rough. The Empire is entering an era of peace. I require a wife who understands society, a woman who brings warmth and gentleness to my estate, a softer bride. He placed a hand delicately over Lady Natalia's gloved fingers. She offered a fragile, trembling smile. I am so sorry, General Remington, she whispered, her voice like spun sugar. We could not deny our hearts. A heavy silence fell over our corner of the ballroom. I could feel the greedy stares of the court, the politicians who had always feared my influence, drinking in my public humiliation. They expected me to weep. They expected me to rage, to draw the ceremonial sword at my hip and prove Arthur right. Instead, I analyzed the battlefield. Arthur's faction had been growing too powerful. They wanted the military budget slashed, the veteran pensions redirected into their own pockets. As long as the Tempest Bringer stood at the head of the army, a beloved hero of the people, they could not touch the military infrastructure. Arthur was trying to break my public image. He wanted to paint me as an unhinged, discarded warmonger. I looked at him and realized the boy I had loved in letters had died a long time ago, replaced by a soft, ambitious coward. I see, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a well-sharpened blade. It was perfectly calm, perfectly modulated. Arthur blinked, clearly unnerved by my lack of hysterics. You understand. I understand that a man whose spine is made of paper cannot be expected to carry the weight of a sword, I replied, loud enough for the onlookers to hear. You are correct, Lord Octavius. I am a soldier, and I do not tether myself to liabilities. I reached into the bodice of my gown, retrieved the heavy diamond engagement ring he had given me 5 years ago, and dropped it into his waiting glass of champagne. It sank to the bottom with a dull clink. May you find the softness you seek, Arthur. You will certainly need it when the northern winds blow again. I turned on my heel and walked out of the ballroom. My strides were measured, even, and terrifyingly calm. I left a wake of stunned silence behind me. By the time I reached my carriage, I had already made a decision. Let them have their fragile peace. Let the corrupt politicians bloat themselves on their newly acquired power. I knew the peace would not last. The border skirmishes I had left behind were a tactical retreat by the enemy, not a surrender. But my warnings to the ministry had been ignored. If I stayed in uniform, I would be blocked, defunded, and eventually assassinated by my own people. To save the military I had bled for, I had to step out of the light. I needed to investigate the rot in the Ministry of Defense from the shadows. And to do that, the Tempest Bringer had to vanish. The next morning, my resignation was on the Emperor's desk. I cited exhaustion and a desire for a quiet life. The politicians rejoiced. The army wept. Kiara Remington, the legendary general, retired to a small countryside estate, fading into the mists of history. Or so they thought. Chapter 2. The Contract and the Merchant King. 6 months later, the scent of expensive ink and polished mahogany replaced the smell of cordite in my life. I was living under the name Andrea Thatcher, a respectable, impoverished gentlewoman from the distant western provinces. I wore simple, well-made dresses of wool and linen, kept my hair pinned back severely, and wore spectacles with plain glass lenses that softened the hard edge of my gaze. From my unassuming townhouse in the lower wealth district of the capital, I ran a network of loyal, retired scouts who were slowly uncovering a massive embezzlement ring within Arthur's new military supply chain. But my cover was growing thin. A single woman asking questions about grain shipments and musket powder ledgers drew attention. I needed a better shield. I needed absolute respectability, a fortress of social standing that the ministry's spies couldn't easily breach. I needed a husband. A specific kind of husband. Wealthy, influential, completely disconnected from the military, and, ideally, entirely uninterested in romance. Enter Roland Parker. Roland was the head of the Parker Consortium, a mercantile empire that controlled half the shipping lanes in Pax Abundantia. He was also, quietly, the heir to the dukedom of Vane, though he despised the title and the aristocratic leeches that came with it. I knew his schedule, I knew his enemies, and I knew his current, desperate problem. His ailing grandfather, the current duke, had mandated that Roland must marry a respectable woman before the end of the year, or the entire estate, and the capital backing Roland's shipping fleet would be handed over to a profligate cousin. I arranged our meeting with the precision of a cavalry charge. I accidentally sheltered from a sudden downpour in the same elite bookstore he frequented on Tuesday afternoons. I made sure I was reading a complex treatise on naval trade winds, a topic I knew his captains were currently struggling with. When he approached me, intrigued by a woman reading advanced naval navigation, I saw him up close for the first time. Roland Parker was not a soft aristocrat. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of a stormy sea and dark hair that refused to be tamed by the current fashion of powdered wigs. He had the calloused hands of a man who had actually worked on his own ships before commanding them. Within 30 minutes of conversation, we were debating trade tariffs. Within an hour, we were in his private carriage, sharing tea. "You are a remarkably pragmatic woman, Miss Thatcher," Roland said, studying me over the rim of his teacup. He looked exhausted, the dark circles under his eyes speaking of endless boardroom battles and family squabbles. "Pragmatism is a necessity for survival, Mr. Parker," I replied smoothly, adjusting my spectacles. "Just as a marriage of convenience is currently a necessity for yours." He choked on his tea. He set the cup down, his stormy eyes narrowing. "I beg your pardon? You need a wife," I stated, laying my cards on the table. "One who is respectable, quiet, and demands nothing of your time or your heart. If you do not marry by December, your cousin inherits the Vane estate, and by extension, the collateral for your 3 newest trade galleons. It would ruin your expansion into the eastern spice markets." Roland stared at me, a mixture of shock and wariness crossing his handsome face. "How do you know that?" "I am an observer, Mr. Parker, and I am in need of an arrangement myself." I folded my hands in my lap. "I require financial stability and the social protection that comes with the Parker name. I have my own quiet pursuits, charity work, historical research that I wish to conduct without interference or questions. I will manage your household perfectly. I will deal with your insufferable relatives. I will be the flawless invisible wife. In exchange, you provide me with an unassailable cover and a generous allowance." He leaned forward, intrigued. "You ask for no affection? No shared bed? I ask for a partnership, Mr. Parker. A contract." A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. transforming him from a stressed merchant into something devastatingly handsome. Miss Thatcher, you might be the most terrifyingly rational woman I have ever met. I accept. 3 weeks later, the ink was dry on a heavily notarized contract, and we were married in a quiet, private ceremony. I was no longer Kiara Remington, the Tempest bringer. I was Andrea Parker, the unassuming wife of the wealthiest man in the Empire. And I finally had the cover I needed to go to war. Chapter 3. The Battlefield of the Drawing Room. If the Northern Front was a war of artillery and attrition, high society was a war of poisoned smiles and silk fans. Moving into the massive Parker estate on the edge of the capital meant I was immediately thrust into the viper's nest of Roland's extended family. Leading the charge was his aunt, Lady Diana, a woman whose face was permanently sour, and her daughter, Astrid, who had fully intended to marry Roland herself before I appeared from the gutter. They thought they were dealing with a frightened, low-born mouse. They didn't realize they had invited a general into their home. The first major engagement took place in the sunlit drawing room, exactly 1 week after the wedding. Lady Diana had invited 5 of the most vicious gossips in the capital for afternoon tea, intending to publicly break my spirit and prove to Roland that I was unfit for his house. I entered the room wearing a simple, elegant gown of slate gray. It was conservative, impeccable, and gave them absolutely nothing to mock. "Ah, Andrea, dear," Lady Diana drawled, not rising from her velvet chaise. "Do come sit. We were just discussing the opera, but I suppose in the western provinces your idea of music is a goat bleeding in a field." The women tittered behind their teacups. I took the seat opposite her, keeping my posture flawless. I simply let the silence stretch. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. In interrogation, silence is a weapon. It forces the enemy to fill the void, often making a mistake. The snickering died down. The women began to shift uncomfortably under my calm, unblinking gaze. "The western provinces are indeed rural, Lady Diana," I said, my voice pleasant and perfectly modulated, though I find the honesty of a goat far preferable to the false notes often sung in the capital. Speaking of false notes, I reviewed the household ledgers this morning. Lady Diana went stiff. "It seems," I continued, pouring myself a cup of tea with steady hands, "that the allowance allocated for the estate's floral arrangements has been exceeding the budget by nearly 400%, a remarkable sum. Coincidentally, it perfectly matches the debts Miss Astrid recently accrued at the Modiste for her extensive new winter wardrobe." Astrid gasped, her face turning the color of an overripe plum. The other gossips leaned in, their eyes wide with sudden, ravenous interest. The predator had suddenly become the prey. "How dare you look at those ledgers?" Diana hissed, forgetting her aristocratic drawl. "I am the lady of this house," I reminded her, taking a delicate sip of my tea. "It is my duty to ensure my husband's funds are not being mismanaged. Roland works so terribly hard. I have already corrected the error with the bank and cancelled the excess floral accounts." "I'm sure you understand." I smiled at her. It was the same smile I used when accepting the surrender of an enemy captain. Diana looked as though she had swallowed a lemon whole. The gossips were already whispering. The story of Diana's theft of household funds practically writing itself in their minds. The siege was broken before they had even fired a shot. That evening, when Roland returned from the docks, he found the house suspiciously quiet. He entered my private study, where I was reviewing intercepted supply manifests from the ministry. "I don't know what you did," Roland said, loosening his cravat, a look of bewildered amusement on his face. But my Aunt Diana actually bowed her head when I passed her in the hall, and Astrid is crying in her room about cancelled dresses. My steward tells me you've slashed household waste by 30% in a single day. I merely reorganized the supply lines, Roland, I said, not looking up from my papers. Inefficiency is a pet peeve of mine. He walked over and leaned against my desk, looking down at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, but that seemed a lot like respect. And something warmer. You are full of surprises, Andrea, he murmured. I expected a quiet wife. I didn't expect a master tactician. You hired me to manage your household, I replied, meeting his stormy eyes. I intend to defend your territory flawlessly. He laughed, a rich, deep sound that made something in my chest flutter in a highly irregular, untactical manner. Defend away, my dear, defend away. Over the next few months, our contract marriage began to shift. It was subtle at first. Roland began joining me for dinner every evening, dismissing his business associates early just to sit by the fire and debate politics, philosophy, and history with me. He would bring me rare books from his travels. I would quietly restructure his shipping routes to avoid pirate waters I knew existed from old military intelligence. We were a terrifyingly efficient team. He was bewildered by my lucky guesses about which trade ministers were corrupt. I was equally bewildered by how safe I felt when he casually placed a hand on the small of my back at social functions, shielding me from the vultures of the court. I was beginning to care for the merchant king, and that made me careless. Chapter 4. The Rot Spreads. The peace I had left behind shattered exactly as I had predicted. 8 months into my marriage, news reached the capital that the Highland barbarians had crossed the frozen sea once more. But this time, they were armed with modern Pax Abundantia muskets. I stood by the window of my study, reading the secret missives my loyal scouts had smuggled to me. The situation was catastrophic. Arthur Octavius, now holding the rank of High Commander, a rank he earned through political maneuvering, not merit, had deployed our troops into a bottleneck valley. It was a slaughter. Worse, the supply lines were failing. My investigations had finally yielded the full, horrifying truth. Arthur and a cabal of corrupt nobles were selling imperial weapons to the enemy and pocketing the gold, leaving our own soldiers starving and freezing on the front lines. The military I had built was being dismantled for profit. Andrea? I turned. Roland was standing in the doorway, looking grim. He held a newspaper in his hand. The headline screamed, "Massacre at Viridian. Where is the Tempest bringer?" "The markets are panicking," Roland said, stepping into the room. "The army is routed. The Emperor has called an emergency gala tonight at the Citadel to raise war funds, but the people are losing faith. They are demanding the return of General Remington." He looked at me, his eyes searching. "You look pale. Are you unwell?" "I am fine," I lied, my mind racing through strategic variables. The time for hiding in the shadows was over. If Arthur was not stopped tonight, the capital would fall within a month. I had enough evidence to hang Arthur and his conspirators, but handing it over anonymously wouldn't work. The corruption ran too deep. It required a physical, undeniable force to purge it. It required the Tempest bringer. "We must attend the gala tonight," I said, my voice hardening to the tone I used to command battalions. Roland blinked, surprised by my sudden shift in demeanor. "It will be dangerous. There are rumors of enemy sympathizers within the city walls. I would rather keep you safe here." "I am your wife," I said, stepping toward him. "Where you go, I go. Besides, you will need me." He smiled softly, reaching out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind my ear. The gentleness of his touch made my heart ache. He thought he was protecting a scholar. He didn't know he was harboring a weapon. Very well, he said softly. But stay close to me tonight, Andrea. I won't let anything happen to you. Oh, Roland, I thought. You have no idea. Chapter 5. The Gala of Traitors. The Citadel was a fortress disguised as a palace. Tonight, it was packed with the panicked elite of Pax Abundantia. The air was thick with fear and the smell of too much perfume, a desperate attempt to mask the scent of impending doom. I wore a gown of deep crimson, the color of blood, the color of the Imperial Army. I had discarded my spectacles. I stood tall, my posture no longer the demure slouch of Andrea Thatcher, but the predatory stillness of Kiera Remington. Roland noticed the change, casting me curious, admiring glances as we navigated the crowded hall. Across the room, standing by the Emperor's dais, was Arthur Octavius. He looked haggard, his pale velvet suit looking ridiculous in the face of actual war. Beside him was Lady Natalia, looking terrified. Arthur was currently making a speech, his voice carrying over the nervous crowd. And despite the tragic losses, the ministry assures you that our defenses are strong. The rumors of supply shortages are treasonous lies. We only need more funding. He's lying, I murmured to Roland, who stood close behind me, his hand resting protectively on my waist. I know, Roland whispered back, his eyes dark. My ships were contracted to carry grain north. The ministry canceled the orders last week. They're starving their own men. Before I could reply, the heavy oak doors of the grand hall slammed shut. The loud clack of heavy iron bolts sliding into place echoed through the room. The string quartet stopped playing. The crowd fell dead silent. From the servants' corridors and the balcony above, armed men poured into the room. They wore the uniforms of the Imperial City Guard. But, upon closer inspection, I could tell they bore the crest of the rebel Highlanders. Panic erupted. Women screamed, and nobles scrambled, slipping on the polished marble. The armed men leveled their muskets at the crowd. A man stepped forward from the ranks of the traitors. He was a known associate of Arthur's, a corrupt general I had investigated years ago. "Nobody move!" he roared. "The Emperor is now under our protection. The city is ours." I looked at Arthur. He looked pale, but he was nodding at the traitor general. Arthur had sold out the capital itself to save his own skin and secure his wealth. "Andrea, get behind me," Roland commanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He stepped in front of me, grabbing a heavy silver candelabra from a nearby table, prepared to fight armed soldiers with a piece of diningware to protect me. My heart swelled with a fierce, blinding affection for this man. But I could not let him die for a lie. 2 rebel guards spotted Roland, the wealthiest man in the room, a prime hostage. They sneered, raising their bayonets and charging straight at us. "Roland, drop it!" I said. He braced himself. The first guard lunged. I didn't think. The battle trance, dormant for 8 months, snapped over my mind like a steel trap. Time slowed. I stepped out from behind Roland, my crimson skirt swirling. With my bare left hand, I struck the flat of the guard's bayonet, knocking the deadly point aside. In the same fluid motion, I drove the heel of my right hand upward, shattering the guard's nose. As he crumpled, I ripped the musket from his grip, spun the heavy wooden stock around, and smashed it into the temple of the second guard. Both men were unconscious on the floor in under 3 seconds. The immediate area fell into a stunned, breathless silence. Roland turned to me, the silver candelabra slipping from his fingers to clatter against the marble. His stormy eyes were wide with absolute, unadulterated shock. He looked at the unconscious soldiers, then at my delicate hands, then up to my face. "Andrea," he whispered, his voice cracking. What are you?" From the back of the hall, a voice rang out, loud, sharp, and commanding. "General, on the floor!" I looked up. My former lieutenant, a grizzled veteran named Corvus, who had infiltrated the Citadel staff as a footman on my orders weeks ago, was striding through the terrified crowd. He held a bundle of dark fabric in his arms. He stopped a few feet from me, dropped to one knee, and held up the bundle. With a swift, practiced motion, I shook the fabric out. It was a heavy, midnight blue military cloak, bordered in silver thread, with the golden crest of the Supreme Commander upon the shoulder. I swung the cloak over my crimson gown, the heavy fabric settling onto my shoulders with the familiar, comforting weight of authority. I turned back to Roland. I let the facade of Andrea Thatcher dissolve completely, looking at him with the fierce, unyielding gaze of the woman who had conquered the North. "My name is not Andrea," I said quietly, for his ears only, "and I apologize for the deception, husband, but I have a war to win." I turned away from his stunned face and looked toward the dais. Arthur Octavius was staring at me, his jaw unhinged, all the blood draining from his face until he looked like a corpse. He recognized the posture. He recognized the cloak. "Tete Tempest bringer," Arthur stammered, stumbling backward until he hit the Emperor's throne. "Hello, Arthur," I said. My voice, in the dead silence of the hall, it carried like thunder. "I told you I do not tether myself to liabilities. You have become a liability to my empire." Chapter 6. The Storm Breaks. The traitor general recovered his wits. "Kill her!" he shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Fire! Fire at will! Shields!" I roared. Instantly, 24 waiters and footmen stationed around the perimeter of the room, my loyal veterans, secretly embedded in the capital's service industry, threw off their aprons. They drew concealed short swords and kicked over heavy banquet tables, forming an improvised barricade between the traitors and the Emperor's dais. Musket fire erupted. The deafening crack of black powder filled the room, shattering chandeliers and raining crystal down upon the screaming nobles. The rebel volley slammed into the thick oak tables, splintering wood but failing to pierce the barrier. "Return fire!" I commanded. My veterans, armed with hidden pistols, returned a devastating, precise volley. Half of the rebel guards fell in the first seconds. I drew the discarded bayonet from the floor, moving with a lethal grace that only years of frontline combat can teach. I flowed through the chaos, a blur of crimson silk and midnight blue. I disarmed a man, incapacitated another with a strike to the throat, and kicked the legs out from under a third. I fought my way straight toward the dais. My eyes locked on Arthur and the traitor general. "Stop her!" Arthur screamed, shoving Lady Natalia in front of him as a human shield. She shrieked, falling to the floor. I vaulted over the final steps of the dais, grabbed the traitor general by his tunic, and drove the hilt of my weapon into his jaw. He went down, out cold. I turned to Arthur. He was backed against the wall, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. He fumbled for the ceremonial sword at his hip, his soft hands shaking too badly to draw it. I simply stepped inside his guard, grabbed him by the lapels of his pristine velvet suit, and slammed him against the stone wall. The breath left his lungs in a pathetic whoosh. "You sold our soldiers," I hissed, my voice a venomous whisper. "You starved my men. You betrayed Pax Abundantia for gold." "Giara, please," he begged, tears streaming down his face. The polished, arrogant politician was gone, replaced by a terrified child. I loved you. Have mercy. I am a soldier, Arthur," I said, echoing the words he had used against me 8 months ago. "I am hard. I am cold. And I have no mercy for traitors." I threw him to the floor at the Emperor's feet. "Your Majesty," I said, executing a flawless, crisp salute to the trembling monarch. The traitor is subdued. My loyal forces have secured the perimeter of the citadel. The rebellion in the capital is crushed. The emperor, an older man who had always favored me, let out a shaky breath and stood. "General Remington," he said, his voice echoing in the now silent hall, "you have returned." "I never left, sire," I replied. I turned back to the room. The remaining rebel guards had thrown down their weapons, terrified by the sudden reversal and the sheer presence of the Tempest bringer. The nobles were slowly rising from beneath tables, staring at me in awe. And then I saw Roland. He was standing right where I had left him, amidst the shattered glass and fallen enemies. He was looking at me with absolute, burning reverence. I walked down the steps of the dais, the sea of aristocrats parting for me as if I were a goddess of war. Lady Diana and Astrid were huddled near a pillar, staring at me with a horror so profound it would have been comical under different circumstances. The low-born mouse they had tormented was the most feared military commander on the continent. I gave them a brief, icy smile, and watched Astrid actually faint into her mother's arms. I stopped in front of Roland. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me suddenly feeling very vulnerable. For 8 months, I had been his calm, predictable Andrea. Now, I was covered in dust, holding a stolen bayonet, wearing a military cloak. "Roland," I said quietly. He took a step toward me. He reached out, his large, warm hand gently taking the bayonet from my grip and tossing it aside. Then, ignoring the emperor, ignoring the arrested traitors, ignoring the hundreds of staring nobles, he pulled me into his arms. A master tactician indeed. He murmured against my hair, his voice rough with emotion. "You played me brilliantly, General." I pulled back slightly, looking up into his stormy eyes. "Are you angry?" "The contract was built on a lie. I am not a quiet gentlewoman." A slow, devastating smile spread across his face. "Angry? Andrea, Chiara. You just took down an armed insurrection in a ball gown. You saved my life. You saved the Empire. I am not angry." He brushed a thumb over the silver scar on my jaw, a touch so tender it made my breath catch. "I am the proudest man in the world. Though I do feel a bit foolish for trying to protect you with a candlestick." A laugh startled its way out of my throat, breaking the tension. "It was a very brave gesture, husband. We need to renegotiate our contract," he said, his eyes darkening with a sudden intense heat. "The clause regarding no shared affection is officially void." "Agreed," I whispered, just before he leaned down and kissed me. It was a claim, a promise, and a surrender all at once. The hall erupted into cheers. Chapter 7, The New Era. The aftermath of the Citadel insurrection was swift and brutal. With the Tempest bringer officially back in command, the military rallied with a fervor that shook the continent. Within 2 weeks, I was back on the Northern Front. But this time, I was not fighting a war of attrition. I was fighting a war of annihilation, fully backed by the immense, untouchable wealth of the Parker Consortium. Roland had mobilized his entire merchant fleet. When the corrupt supply lines failed, Roland's ships arrived, breaking the ice of the northern ports to deliver food, winter uniforms, and high-grade musket powder directly to my troops. He had systematically destroyed the financial holdings of Arthur's co-conspirators, leaving them penniless before they even faced the executioner's block. Arthur Octavius was stripped of his titles, his wealth, and his dignity. The last I heard, he had been sentenced to hard labor in the southern salt mines. Lady Natalia had quickly abandoned him, marrying an elderly baron in the provinces. The satisfaction of their downfall was a quiet, cold comfort, overshadowed entirely by the warmth of my new life. 3 months later, the war was won. The Highland barbarians sued for peace, signing a treaty that guaranteed the security of Pax Abundantia's borders for a generation. I rode back into the capital not as a discarded hero, but as the savior of the empire. The streets were lined with cheering crowds, raining rose petals down upon my cavalry. I wore my full dress uniform, riding a massive black war horse. I looked at the man standing at the front of the crowd, wearing a dark, impeccably tailored suit, watching me with eyes like a stormy sea. I halted my horse, swung down from the saddle, and tossed the reins to my lieutenant. Ignoring military protocol, I walked straight through the line of Imperial guards and threw my arms around my husband. Roland caught me, lifting me off the ground and spinning me around, burying his face in my neck. "Welcome home, General," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I told you I would defend your territory flawlessly," I whispered back, pulling away just enough to kiss him. Later that evening, we stood on the balcony of the Parker estate, looking out over the peaceful, starlit city. The insufferable Lady Diana and Astrid had been banished to a minor country estate, leaving the house to us. I leaned against Roland's chest, his arms wrapped securely around my waist. The heavy burden of command, the constant vigilance, the fear of betrayal, it was all gone. I was still the Tempest bringer. I would always be the sword of Pax Abundantia, but I no longer had to fight alone. I was thinking, Roland said softly, his chin resting on the top of my head. The western trade routes are secure. The Empire is at peace. You have a few months of leave, do you not? I do, I replied, tracing the line of his arm. Good, because I have a new contract to propose, he said, turning me in his arms so I could see his face. His eyes were warm, filled with a deep, abiding love that no tactical manual could ever prepare me for. A lifelong partnership, no secrets, no shadows. Just us. I smiled, rising onto my toes to press my lips to his. I accept your terms, Mr. Parker, unconditionally. The end. I know now the taste of betrayal, of regret, of death. This time, I'm in the mood for revenge. Modern Queen Tales presents Bring Me Back and Bring Me Vengeance. The cold was what I remembered most vividly. It was a damp, seeping chill that had crawled up from the concrete floor of the holding cell and settled deep into my marrow. My lungs had burned, each breath a jagged shard of glass, the result of the slow-acting poison they had slipped into my tea for months. I had been coughing up blood for weeks, my body wasting away, while the world outside believed the headlines. Markham heiress succumbs to madness, awaits trial for corporate fraud, through the iron bars. I had seen their faces one last time. My husband Tristan, wearing the bespoke Tom Ford suit my money had bought him, his handsome face twisted into a mask of polite pity that didn't quite reach his eyes. And beside him, my cousin, Simone, sweet, timid Simone, who had lived in my house, worn my clothes, and cried on my shoulder. She was clinging to Tristan's arm, a diamond glittering on her finger, my mother's diamond. "It's better this way, Rebecca," Tristan had whispered, his voice smooth and devoid of the love he had faked for 5 years. "You're sick. We're just putting you out of your misery. And the Markham Empire, well, it's in better hands now." "We really did love you, Becky," Simone had chimed in, though a wicked, triumphant smirk played on her lips. "But you were just too gullible, too soft for this world." My vocal cords were paralyzed by the toxin. I could only stare at them, the two people I had loved more than life itself, as the realization of their years-long affair, their systematic draining of my inheritance, and their elaborate frame-up washed over me in a wave of agonizing clarity. The lethal injection they had bribed the guard to administer masked, as a sudden heart failure was just the final punctuation on their masterpiece of betrayal. As the darkness had closed in, my final thought had been a burning, incandescent rage, a plea to whatever forces governed the universe for one more chance. Just one. And then I gasped. My eyes snapped open, my chest heaving as if I had just breached the surface of a freezing ocean. I scrambled backward, my hands clawing at what I expected to be a concrete floor, but instead, my fingers sank into the plush, familiar silk of 1,000-thread Count duvet. I was trembling violently, slick with a cold sweat. I squeezed my eyes shut, expecting the sterile, acidic smell of the prison cell. Instead, the faint, luxurious scent of English roses and expensive lavender filled my senses. I opened my eyes again. Sunlight was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a golden glow over the powder blue and gold accents of my master bedroom in the Markham estate. The room I had shared with Tristan. The room I had been evicted from. I threw off the covers and stumbled toward the antique gilded mirror resting in the corner. I braced myself to see the gaunt, hollowed-out ghost with thinning hair and gray skin. The woman staring back at me was vibrant. My cheeks were flush with health, my dark hair falling in thick, glossy waves over my shoulders. The dark circles that had haunted my final months were gone. I looked down at my hands. They were steady, manicured, and free of the bruises from the IV lines. Trembling, I reached for the smartphone resting on the mahogany nightstand. The screen lit up. March 12th, 3 years ago. I dropped the phone on the bed, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a sob. It wasn't a dream. The agony, the betrayal, the freezing floor of the cell, they were memories of a future that had already happened to me. The universe had heard my dying plea. I had been reborn. I had been given a second chance. I was back. Back before Tristan had convinced me to grant him power of attorney. Back before Simone had manufactured the evidence of my embezzlement. Back when I still held the entirety of the multi-billion-dollar Markham inheritance in the palm of my hand. A knock on the bedroom door made me freeze. "Rebecca, darling, are you awake?" It was Tristan. His voice was a velvet purr, the same tone he used to soothe me when I was stressed, the same tone he had used to condemn me to death. A primal urge to scream, to grab the heavy brass lamp and smash it against his skull, surged through me. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. But then, the icy resolve that had crystallized in my final moments took over. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and shoved the naive, trusting Rebecca deep down into a lightless box. She was dead. The woman who stood in her place was forged from ice and vengeance. "Come in, Tristan," I called out, my voice perfectly steady. The door swung open, and he walked in. Carrying a silver tray with a single espresso and a fresh croissant, he looked exactly as he had 3 years ago, devastatingly handsome, with his tousled sandy hair and boyish smile, the smile that had cost me my life. "Good morning, my love," he said, setting the tray on the table and leaning in to kiss my forehead. It took every ounce of my willpower not to flinch away from his touch. His lips felt like a brand. "You slept in," he noted, his eyes scanning my face with feigned concern. "Are you feeling all right? You usually have the board meeting prep done by now." The board meeting, of course. This was the month he first suggested I step back from the company's daily operations to focus on our marriage, planting the seeds to insert his own loyalists onto the executive board. "I'm perfectly fine," I said, offering him a serene, empty smile. Just a vivid dream. But I woke up with a surprising amount of clarity. He chuckled, entirely oblivious to the double meaning. "Good. Because Simone is coming over later. She wanted to show you the dress she picked out for the autumn gala. You know how she values your opinion. Simone, just hearing her name made my blood run cold. I can't wait to see her, I lied smoothly. In fact, I have some new plans for the gala. And for the company. Tristan's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a brief flash of annoyance crossing his features before he masked it. Plans? We should discuss them, darling. You know I'm here to handle the heavy lifting so you don't stress yourself. Oh, don't worry, Tristan, I said, picking up the espresso cup and taking a slow sip. The bitterness grounded me. I won't be stressed at all. I know exactly what needs to be done. The transformation was immediate, though I was careful to keep the surface placid. For the first week, I played the part of the devoted wife and the doting older cousin. I let Simone parade around my dressing room, fawning over my designer bags and casually asking to borrow a diamond tennis bracelet, a bracelet I knew she had eventually pawned to fund a private getaway with Tristan in my previous life. I smiled. I let her take it. Let them gorge themselves on their perceived cleverness. Let them think I was the same blind lamb being led to the slaughter. Behind closed doors, however, I was a machine. I contacted my family's oldest, most trusted lawyer, a man Tristan had eventually manipulated me into firing, and initiated a massive, covert audit of all Markham Foundation accounts. I quietly revoked Tristan's access to my secondary portfolios, locking millions of dollars into blind trusts that required my physical, biometric signature to move. I hired an elite private security firm, discreetly replacing the household staff Tristan had brought in with professionals loyal only to me. And most importantly, I hired a team of private investigators to tail Tristan and Simone 24 hours a day. Within 5 days, I had a dossier thick enough to stop a bullet. High-definition photographs of Tristan and Simone entering a boutique hotel downtown. Transcripts of burner phone texts detailing their disgust for my cluelessness and their impatience for my unfortunate demise. Financial records showing Tristan had already begun skimming small amounts from the company's philanthropic branch to funnel into a shell corporation registered in Simone's name. Sitting in my private study, illuminated only by the glow of my laptop, I sifted through the evidence. A tear slipped down my cheek, not for the loss of them, but for the girl I used to be, the girl who had loved them so unconditionally. I wiped it away aggressively. There would be no more tears. Now that my assets were secure, I needed a shield. I knew Tristan's ruthlessness. When he realized he was being cut off, he wouldn't just walk away. In my past life, when I had started asking the wrong questions, they had resorted to poison and framing me. I needed an ally so powerful, so untouchable, that Tristan wouldn't dare cross the line into physical violence. I needed Laurent Jade. In my first life, Laurent had been a periphery figure, a notoriously reclusive, ruthlessly efficient billionaire who dominated the international shipping and tech industries. He was known as the Ice King of Wall Street, a man who destroyed monopolies for breakfast. I had only interacted with him a handful of times at high society functions, always finding him intimidating and cold. But at the very end of my previous life, when the world had turned its back on me, when my name was synonymous with disgrace, it was Laurent Jade's legal team that had suddenly appeared, trying to file appeals on my behalf. It was Laurent who had demanded an independent autopsy, a request Tristan had frantically managed to block with a judge he'd bribed. I hadn't known why Laurent had tried to save me, but I knew he was the only person in this city with the power to crush Tristan like an insect. I arranged our meeting with the precision of a military strike. I knew he dined at an exclusive, members-only club in Manhattan every Thursday at 8 p.m. I wore a sleek, backless, emerald green gown that commanded attention. My hair swept up to expose the line of my neck. When I entered the dimly lit, mahogany-paneled dining room, heads turned. But my eyes were fixed solely on the man sitting alone in a secluded corner booth. Laurent Jade was even more striking than I remembered. He had sharp, aristocratic features, a strong jawline, and eyes as dark and unfathomable as midnight. He radiated an aura of absolute authority. I bypassed the maitre d' and walked directly to his table. His security detail stepped forward, but Laurent raised a single, long finger, halting them instantly. His dark eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, the breath caught in my throat. There was an intensity in his gaze, a sudden, almost imperceptible flaring of emotion that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Mrs. Markham," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. "To what do I owe the pleasure, Mr. Jade?" I replied smoothly, sliding into the leather booth across from him without being asked. "I prefer Miss Markham, or simply Rebecca." One dark eyebrow arched in mild amusement. "Is that so?" The society pages would suggest otherwise. "The society pages write what they are paid to write," I countered, leaning forward slightly. "I'm here because I have a business proposition. One that requires discretion, power, and someone who isn't afraid of the Markham family name. Namely, my husband." Laurent slowly picked up his glass of scotch, taking a measured sip. "You want me to help you destroy Tristan Markham." It was a statement of fact. I didn't bother hiding my surprise. "You're well informed. I make it my business to know everything about the boardrooms in this city," he said, setting the glass down. "Tristan is a parasite, but he is your parasite. Why come to me?" "Because," I said, my voice hardening, the memories of the prison cell bleeding into my tone, "a parasite doesn't just feed, it kills the host. I intend to amputate him, completely and publicly. But a trapped animal is dangerous. I need someone who can ensure he cannot retaliate financially or legally while I set the trap." "An alliance," Laurent mused. He leaned forward, the scent of bergamot and cedar wrapping around me. The proximity was intoxicating, dizzying in a way that caught me off guard. And what do I get out of playing knight to a damsel who is clearly holding a sword? 30% of Tristan's shares in Markham Tech once I seize them, and exclusive shipping contracts for your European division? I answered without hesitation. Laurent stared at me for a long, silent minute. The air between us practically hummed with an electric tension. I felt stripped bare beneath his gaze, yet entirely safe. "Keep your shares, Rebecca," he said softly, his voice dropping an octave. "I don't need your money." "Then what do you want?" I asked, my heart doing a strange flutter. "Cooperation," he said simply. "When the fallout happens, you do not run. You stand your ground, and you let me ensure your safety. Do we have a deal?" He extended his hand across the table. I looked at it, then up at his dark, serious eyes. I placed my hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and shockingly gentle. "We have a deal." The game of cat and mouse began the next morning. I started by casually slicing Tristan's Achilles tendon, financially speaking. During a routine breakfast, while he was buttering his toast and checking his stocks, his phone buzzed, and then buzzed again, and again. He frowned, picking it up. I watched over the rim of my teacup as the color drained from his perfectly tanned face. "Is everything all right, darling?" I asked, my voice dripping with innocent concern. Yes, just a bank error," he stammered, his eyes darting nervously. "My black card was just declined on a business expense. I'll have my assistant sort it." "Oh, I actually had my accountant restructure some of our shared accounts yesterday," I said breezily, taking a bite of a strawberry. There was so much unnecessary leakage. I put everything into a centralized trust under my direct signature. It's much safer, don't you think? Tristan stared at me, his jaw clenching. He realized in that moment that his endless well of cash had just dried up. Rebecca, you shouldn't concern yourself with these things. You don't understand complex asset management. I understand it perfectly. Tristan, I interrupted, letting a fraction of the ice bleed into my eyes. The sudden shift in my demeanor made him physically recoil. The money is secure, unless you have expenses you'd prefer I didn't know about. He swallowed hard, forcing a tight smile. Of course not, you're right, it's efficient. Later that afternoon, the second blow landed. Simone burst into my private sitting room, tears streaming down her face. Becky, she wailed, throwing herself onto the sofa. The most awful thing has happened. The foundation board just rejected my proposal for the new charity wing, and they froze my expense account. They said the orders came directly from you. I looked up from the book I was reading, my expression composed. They did. Simone blinked, her fake tears drying up instantly in her confusion. What? But why? I need that money for the silent auction prep, and my allowance. You are 24, Simone, I said, closing the book with a sharp snap that made her jump. You have been living in my home rent-free for 3 years. Your allowance was a courtesy, not a salary. And your charity proposal was poorly researched and heavily inflated. I cannot justify funneling Markham money into a black hole. But we're family, she cried, a hint of genuine panic creeping into her voice. She was used to manipulating me with a few pouts and tears. She didn't know how to handle a wall of stone. Indeed, I said calmly, standing up. Which is why I'm giving you 1 month to find your own apartment. It's time you learned how to stand on your own 2 feet, cousin. I won't enable you anymore. I walked out of the room, leaving her sputtering in shock. It was a minor victory, but the look of pure terror on her face was sweeter than any champagne. But a trapped rat bites. 2 days later, I was leaving a late meeting at the Markham corporate tower. The underground parking garage was dimly lit and eerily quiet. My driver had texted that he was held up in traffic on the surface level, so I had decided to walk to my private parking space myself. I was carrying a briefcase containing the finalized legal documents that completely removed Tristan from any claim to my estate. As I approached my sleek black sedan, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The silence was suddenly broken by the sharp squeak of rubber on concrete. From behind a concrete pillar, 2 men stepped out. They wore dark hoodies, their faces obscured. One of them held a heavy steel pipe. Hand over the briefcase, lady, the taller one grunted, advancing on me. My heart hammered. Tristan. He was desperate. He had realized the gravity of my financial blockades and was trying to intercept the documents by force. I backed up against my car, clutching the leather handle of the briefcase. I wasn't the weak, sickly woman from my past life, but I was still physically outmatched. Take the purse, I said coldly. Leave the case. The man laughed, lunging forward with the pipe raised. Before I could brace for the impact, a dark shadow detached itself from the gloom behind the men. It happened so fast it was a blur. A tall figure in a tailored black suit moved with lethal, terrifying grace. A hand shot out, grabbing the wrist of the man with the pipe and twisting it with a sickening crack. The man screamed, dropping the weapon. The second attacker pulled a knife, but the dark figure delivered a punishing blow to the man's throat, sending him collapsing to the concrete, gasping for air. Within seconds, both attackers were groaning on the floor. The figure turned toward me. The dim fluorescent light caught the sharp angles of his face. Laurent, are you hurt? He asked, his voice harsh, his chest heaving slightly from the exertion. No, I breathed, my adrenaline spiking. I took a step toward him, but my heel caught on a drainage grate. My ankle twisted, and I pitched forward. Strong arms wrapped around my waist, pulling me flush against a hard, muscular chest. I gasped, my hands flying up to grip his lapels to steady myself. I was looking directly up into Laurent's face. The proximity was overwhelming. I could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the rapid pulse at his throat, the deep, furious concern in his dark eyes. The heat radiating off his body enveloped me, chasing away the chill of the garage. "I've got you," he murmured, his grip tightening protectively. "I told you I would ensure your safety." For a moment, I just stared at him, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. In my previous life, my husband had sent men to kill me. In this life, a man I barely knew had just fought them off with his bare hands. The urge to melt into his embrace, to let someone else carry the burden of my survival, was dangerously strong. But then, a memory flashed in my mind, a headline I had read that morning while researching Laurent's holdings. Billionaire Laurent Jade spotted in Paris with rumored fiancée Corinne Benoit. I stiffened, pushing myself gently out of his arms. "Thank you, Laurent, but you shouldn't have risked yourself. Your fiancé wouldn't be pleased if you were injured playing bodyguard." Laurent's brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "My fiancé?" "Corinne Benoit," I said, trying to keep my tone light and unaffected, though a strange tightness gripped my chest. I smoothed down my skirt. "I saw the articles. I wouldn't want to cause any trouble in your personal life." Laurent let out a sudden, rough bark of laughter. It was a rich, warm sound that echoed in the garage. "Corinne is my cousin Rebecca," he said, shaking his head, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "She's an heiress to a French cosmetics line and uses me as a shield against paparazzi when she's in town hiding from her actual, highly scandalized ex-boyfriend. I am most certainly not engaged." I felt a rush of heat flood my cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and a profound, undeniable sense of relief. "Oh, I see." He stepped closer, closing the distance I had just put between us. He reached up, his knuckles lightly brushing against my cheek. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to my core. "There's no one else, Rebecca," he said quietly, the intensity in his eyes pinning me in place. "There hasn't been for a very long time. Now, let me take you home." The climax of my vengeance was set for the Markham Centennial Gala. It was the most prestigious social event of the year, a gathering of the city's elite, politicians, and corporate titans. It was also the night Tristan had planned to announce his appointment as the permanent CEO of the Markham Foundation, citing my declining health as the reason for my early retirement. I spent hours getting ready, treating the preparation like armoring for war. I wore a custom-made, blood-red velvet gown that clung to my curves, paired with my grandmother's diamond parure. I looked nothing like the sickly victim they wanted me to be. I looked like a queen stepping up to the executioner's block, only this time I held the axe. Laurent arrived to escort me. When he saw me descending the grand staircase of my estate, his breath hitched. He looked devastating in a classic black tuxedo, his eyes burning with a possessive fire that made my knees weak. "You look." He paused, searching for the word. "Lethal. That is exactly the intention." I smiled, taking his offered arm. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was glittering with crystal chandeliers and overflowing with orchids. As Laurent and I entered, a hush fell over the crowd. The whispers started immediately. I was supposed to be at home, resting. I was certainly not supposed to be on the arm of Laurent Jade, looking radiant and powerful. I spotted Tristan across the room, standing near the podium with Simone. The color drained from Tristan's face so fast he looked ill. Simone's mouth dropped open in an unattractive gape. I detached myself from Laurent with a reassuring squeeze of his hand and glided across the floor toward my husband. "Rebecca," Tristan hissed as I approached, his hands trembling slightly as he grabbed my elbow. "What are you doing here? You told me you were too tired to attend. And with Jade?" "I found a second wind, darling," I said loudly enough for the surrounding guests to hear. I wrenched my arm out of his grasp with a disdainful flick of my wrist. "And it's my family's centennial. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Especially not the speeches." Before Tristan could stop me, I bypassed him and walked directly up the steps to the podium. I tapped the microphone. The sharp screech of feedback silenced the entire room. Hundreds of eyes locked onto me. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice clear and ringing with absolute authority. "Thank you for joining us to celebrate 100 years of the Markham legacy, a legacy built on integrity, charity, and trust." I glanced down at Tristan, whose eyes were wide with panic. He took a step toward the stage, but Laurent smoothly intercepted him, placing a heavy, immovable hand on his shoulder. Tristan was trapped. "Unfortunately," I continued, pacing slowly across the stage, "trust is a fragile commodity. For the past 3 years, I have placed my trust in my husband Tristan and my cousin Simone. I believed they had the Foundation's best interests at heart. I was wrong." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. I reached into the podium and pressed a button. The massive projector screens behind me, meant to show a montage of our charity work, flickered to life. Instead of smiling orphans, the screen displayed high-resolution bank statements. "What you are looking at," I announced, my voice turning to ice, "are the offshore accounts belonging to a shell corporation owned by Simone Markham. Accounts that have been funded by systematically embezzling over $40 million from the Markham Children's Hospital Initiative, authorized by my husband Tristan." Pandemonium erupted in the ballroom. Cameras began flashing wildly. Tristan was violently struggling against Laurent's grip, screaming that it was a lie, a forgery. Simone had collapsed against a table, sobbing hysterically, hiding her face from the cameras. "But financial ruin wasn't enough," I said, raising my voice to cut through the noise. I pressed the button again. An audio waveform appeared on the screen, and the speakers blared to life. Tristan's voice, distorted but unmistakable. "The brakes are done. The mechanic owes me. When she drives down the canyon road tomorrow, it will look like a tragic accident. The inheritance defaults to me instantly." Simone's voice, giggling, finally. "I'm so sick of pretending to like her ugly clothes. We'll go to the Maldives after the funeral." The silence that followed was deafening. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of absolute horror. The elite of society stared at the golden couple they had fawned over minutes ago, seeing them for the monsters they truly were. "The police," I said softly into the microphone, looking directly at Tristan, whose face was a mask of sheer terror, "are already waiting in the lobby. The warrants for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit murder were signed an hour ago." As if on cue, a dozen uniformed officers, led by a stern-faced detective, pushed through the heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom. Tristan snapped. The facade of the suave gentleman vanished, replaced by the cornered, rabid animal I knew him to be. With a feral scream, he tore himself away from Laurent, grabbing a heavy silver steak knife from a nearby dining table. "You bitch!" he roared, lunging toward the stage with the knife raised. "I'll kill you!" the crowd screamed, scattering in terror. I froze, the memories of my previous death paralyzing me for a crucial second. But Laurent was faster. He didn't hesitate. He threw his body between Tristan and the stage. The silver blade flashed under the chandeliers. I heard a sickening tear of fabric and flesh. Laurent let out a low grunt, but his momentum didn't stop. He tackled Tristan to the ground with the force of a freight train, his fist connecting with Tristan's jaw with a crack that echoed through the room. Tristan went limp instantly. "Laurent!" I screamed, hitching up my skirt and flying down the stairs. I dropped to my knees beside him. Laurent was kneeling over Tristan's unconscious body, breathing heavily. Blood was seeping through the torn sleeve of his tuxedo jacket, staining his white shirt crimson. "You're bleeding!" I gasped, my hands hovering over his arm, terrified to cause him more pain. The ice that had protected my heart shattered entirely, replaced by a terrifying, overwhelming flood of panic for the man in front of me. Laurent looked at me, his dark eyes surprisingly soft, despite the chaos erupting around us, as the police swarmed in to drag Tristan and a screaming, thrashing Simone away. "It's just a graze, Rebecca," he said, reaching up with his good arm to tuck a stray lock of hair behind my ear. His thumb brushed over my cheek, wiping away a tear I hadn't realized I shed. "I told you, I will always protect you. Why?" I choked out, the question that had haunted me since my past life finally spilling over. "Why do you care so much? Why did you help me?" Laurent smiled, a genuine, achingly tender expression. He ignored the medics rushing toward us, his focus entirely on me. "Because, Rebecca," he murmured, "I fell in love with a girl who accidentally hit a baseball through my father's greenhouse window when we were 15. A girl who was too brave to run away and apologized with her allowance money. I watched from afar as Tristan manipulated his way into your life, waiting for my chance to prove he wasn't worthy of you. I was too late then. But I wasn't going to let him take you from me again." My breath hitched. The memory clicked into place, a quiet boy with intense eyes at the neighboring summer estate. The boy I had thought was too intimidating to speak to. He had loved me all this time. I didn't care about the cameras, the police, or the ruined gala. I leaned down and pressed my lips to his. He tasted like adrenaline and fine scotch, and he kissed me back with a fierce, desperate passion that promised an eternity of safety. The aftermath was swift and merciless. With the irrefutable evidence I provided, the trial was a media circus that ended in a landslide conviction. Tristan was stripped of every cent he possessed and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole in a maximum security federal prison. Simone's fate was equally poetic. The high society she had worshipped completely excommunicated her. Her parents, utterly humiliated by the scandal, disowned her. Penniless, disgraced, and unable to cope with the reality of her actions, she suffered a severe nervous breakdown and was institutionalized in a state facility, a living hell that mirrored the fate they had once planned for me. I stood at the helm of the Markham Foundation, my position unassailable, my wealth secured, and my heart finally at peace. The naive girl was gone, but the Ice Queen had melted, leaving behind a woman forged in fire and tempered by love. 6 months later, the ocean breeze whipped through my hair as I stood on the sun-drenched balcony of Laurent's cliffside villa in Positano, Italy. The sparkling turquoise waters of the Amalfi Coast stretched out endlessly before me. Strong arms wrapped around my waist from behind, pulling my back against a warm, broad chest. Laurent pressed a soft kiss to the side of my neck, inhaling deeply. "The board approved your new hospital initiative," he murmured against my skin, "without a single dissenting vote. They're terrified of you." "Good," I smiled, leaning back into his embrace. "Let them be." He turned me around in his arms. The Mediterranean sun caught the golden flecks in his dark eyes. He reached into the pocket of his linen trousers and pulled out a small, velvet box. He didn't drop to one knee. "We were equals now, partners in every sense of the word. He simply opened the box, revealing a breathtaking, flawless sapphire surrounded by diamonds. "You reclaimed your life, Rebecca," Laurent said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved yourself. But if you'll let me, I'd like the honor of standing by your side for the rest of it. Marry me." I looked at the man who had been my shadow in my darkest hour, and my light in my second chance. I didn't hesitate. I didn't doubt. Yes, I breathed, wrapping my arms around his neck as he slid the ring onto my finger. In this life, and every one after, we kissed as the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in strokes of gold and crimson. The past was finally a closed chapter, a nightmare I had woken up from. And the future, our future, was entirely, beautifully ours.
Modern Queen Tales presents Astrean Ashes, the Duke's Daughter's rewriting of fate. The taste of blood and ash is something one never truly forgets. It clings to the back of the throat, a phantom residue of absolute despair. In my first life, I died on the cold, unforgiving cobblestones of the execution square in the heart of Astrea's capital. The sky above had been a brilliant, mocking blue, entirely devoid of the mercy I had begged for. I remember the heavy iron scent of my father's and brother's blood seeping into the stones just yards away from where I lay, paralyzed by poison. My beloved family, the Watsons, the most loyal and decorated ducal house in the realm, slaughtered like treasonous dogs, and above me, looking down with eyes as cold as a serpent's, stood my husband of less than 4 hours. Lord Neville Fitzgerald. "You were so easy to mold, Gwen," he had whispered, his handsome face twisting into a sneer I had never seen before our wedding night. He adjusted the pristine cuffs of his velvet doublet, not a drop of my family's blood on him. "Your blind devotion made planting the forged letters in your father's study child's play. The crown will absorb the Watson wealth, and I will be named Duke. Do not fret, your naive little heart won't have to suffer long." Standing beside him, clinging to his arm with an air of triumphant possession, was Lady Brianna Van Buren, my dearest friend. The woman I had clothed, fed, and brought into high society when her own minor barony had gone bankrupt. She looked down at me, her sweet, doe-like eyes hardened into chips of flint. "Sleep well, Gwen," Brianna had cooed, resting her head on Neville's shoulder. "I'll take excellent care of him." The poison Neville had slipped into my wedding chalice tore through my veins, but the physical agony was nothing compared to the shattering of my soul. I had forsaken everything for Neville. I had ignored the warnings of my father. I had even, in my foolish, naive cruelty, completely alienated Prince John Baptiste, the king's formidable shadowed brother, who had offered me his hand, his protection, and a quiet, burning devotion I had been too stupid to understand. I had called John a warmonger to his face, pushing him away to run into the arms of a traitor. As my vision dimmed in that first life, the last thing I saw was a chaotic surge at the edge of the square. A man in black armor, tearing through the Kingsguard with a greatsword, his roars of anguish shaking the very stones. Prince John, he had come for me. He had come too late. The executioner's blade fell, and everything went black. I gasped, shooting upward, my hands clawing frantically at my throat. Air, sweet, crisp, lavender-scented air flooded my lungs. I was not choking on my own blood. My hands were not bound in rough iron. I stared wildly at my surroundings. Sunlight streamed through towering stained glass windows, casting jewel-toned fractals across a plush white wool rug. The walls were draped in the familiar pale blue silks of my childhood bedchamber in the Watson estate. I looked down at my hands. They were smooth, uncalloused, entirely free of the grime and bruises of the royal dungeons. I scrambled out of the 4-poster bed, my legs trembling so violently I nearly collapsed. I threw myself in front of the gilded standing mirror. Staring back at me was a girl of 19. My silver blonde hair cascaded in an untamed halo around my shoulders. My violet eyes, a distinct trait of the Watson bloodline, were wide and terrified, yet vibrant with youth. I was alive. The heavy oak door to my chambers swung open, and my maid, Tilly, bustled in carrying a tray of fresh fruits and warm bread. "Good morning, my lady. Oh, you're already up. We must hurry. The seamstress is waiting to fit you into the rose silk gown for the grand garden gala this afternoon." The tray nearly slipped from her hands as I lunged forward and gripped her shoulders. "Tilly," I rasped, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "What day is it?" "The exact date. Why, it is the 14th of sun's height, my lady," she stammered, her eyes wide with concern. The 14th of sun's height, my breath hitched. The gala. It was the exact day my life had begun its irreversible spiral into hell. It was the day Lord Neville Fitzgerald, the charismatic and rising star of the court, would drop to one knee in front of the entire Astrean nobility and declare his undying love for me. It was the day I had blushingly said yes, sealing the doom of House Watson. I released Tilly, taking a slow, measured step backward. I closed my eyes, letting the phantom pains of the executioner's block fade, replacing them with something entirely different. The grief was gone. The naive, lovesick girl who had idolized Neville's golden hair and honeyed words had died on those cobblestones. What remained in her place was a creature forged in the cold fires of betrayal. I had returned. The gods, in their infinite mystery, had rewound the tapestry of time, and I held the threads in my hands. I knew every secret, every hidden motive, every treacherous move Neville and Brianna would make over the next 2 years. I opened my eyes. The reflection in the mirror was no longer a terrified girl. It was an executioner. "Bring me the dress, Tilly," I said, my voice eerily calm, smooth as glacial ice. "But not the rose silk. Bring me the crimson velvet." If I am to attend a slaughter, I should dress the part. The royal gardens of Astrea were a masterpiece of magical horticulture. Glowing weeping willows draped over marble fountains, and roses the size of dinner plates bloomed in impossible shades of silver and blue. The nobility milled about, a sea of glittering jewels, feathered hats, and dangerous whispers. In my past life, I had walked through these gardens in a haze of romantic anxiety, my eyes searching only for Neville. Today, I walked with my spine perfectly straight, the heavy crimson velvet of my gown sweeping the manicured grass like a river of blood. I saw my family first. My father, Duke Theodore Watson, stood near the king's pavilion, laughing heartily with his generals. My older brothers, Arnold and Cedric, were engaging in a mock duel with wooden practice swords near the hedge maze, drawing admiring sighs from the court ladies. The sight of them whole, alive, their throats uncut hit me with the force of a battering ram. I had to clench my fists in the folds of my gown until my manicured nails bit into my palms to keep from weeping. "I will protect you," I swore to them in my mind. "Even if I have to burn this entire kingdom to the ground. Gwen, my dearest, sweetest Gwen." The voice was like a needle to my eardrums. I turned slowly. Approaching me, wearing a dress of modest, demure lavender that I had paid for, was Lady Brianna Van Buren. Her smile was sickeningly sweet, her brown eyes wide with feigned innocence. "You look absolutely striking," Brianna said, looping her arm intimately through mine. "Though crimson is a bit bold for a garden party, don't you think? Neville so prefers you in softer colors." In my first life, I would have immediately panicked, wishing I could run back and change to please him. Now, I merely looked down at her hand on my arm, as if it were a particularly repulsive insect. "I dress for myself, Brianna," I said smoothly, extracting my arm from her grip. "And bold is exactly how I feel today. Though I must say, lavender washes you out terribly. It makes you look rather desperate." Brianna's smile froze, a flicker of genuine shock cracking her carefully cultivated mask of subservience. What do you mean? Before she could recover, a hush fell over the crowd. The string quartet abruptly ceased playing. Through the parting sea of nobles strode Lord Neville Fitzgerald. He was undeniably handsome, with hair spun from sunlight and eyes the color of a summer sky. He wore a tailored suit of ivory and gold, looking every inch the fairy tale prince. My stomach churned with a mixture of profound disgust and blinding rage. Behind him, servants carried massive bouquets of rare star lilies, my supposed favorite flower. He stopped in front of me, flashing a smile that was designed to melt hearts. It was a practiced, predatory smile. "Lady Guinevere Watson!" Neville's voice boomed, magically amplified, so that the entire garden could hear. He wanted an audience. He needed the pressure of the crowd to ensure my compliance, to trap my father into a public alliance. From the moment my eyes first met yours across the grand ballroom, my soul has belonged to no one else. You are the light of Astrea, the jewel of your noble house. With a dramatic flourish, he dropped to one knee. The crowd collectively gasped. Ladies swooned, lords murmured in approval. "Will you do me the unparalleled honor of becoming my wife?" he asked, producing a velvet box containing a massive diamond ring. Silence descended. In my previous life, I had burst into tears of joy and thrown myself into his arms, effectively signing my family's death warrant. This time, I stood perfectly still. I looked down at him, letting the silence stretch. I let it stretch until it became uncomfortable, until the smiles of the onlookers began to falter. Until a bead of sweat appeared on Neville's perfectly powdered brow. "Lord Fitzgerald," I said loudly, my voice echoing clearly across the hushed gardens. No need to amplify it with magic. The cold authority in my tone carried it far enough. "Your words are exceptionally rehearsed. One might almost believe you meant them, had you not used the exact same poetic phrasing to court the widowed Baroness of Trent 3 months ago." A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. Neville's charming smile shattered instantly, his jaw dropping in shock. The Baroness of Trent, an older, tremendously wealthy woman standing near the fountain, turned scarlet as hundreds of eyes darted toward her. "Lady Watson, Neville stammered, attempting to rise, completely off balance. "Remain on your knee, Lord Fitzgerald. It suits you," I commanded, my voice cracking like a whip. "You come here today, reeking of another woman's perfume, a very cheap rosewater. I might add, an attempt to publicly pressure me into an alliance to elevate your own sagging political standing." I took a step closer, looking down at him with an expression of utter disdain. "You are heavily in debt to the Bank of Southeast Province. Your estates in the south are failing due to your own mismanagement. You do not want a wife. You want a purse. And the House of Watson is not a charity for incompetent lords." The silence in the garden was now absolute, thick and heavy as lead. My father, Duke Watson, had stopped laughing. He was watching me with wide, astonished eyes, but I saw a glimmer of deep, proud approval sparking within them. Neville's face went from pale to a mottled, furious purple. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. The mask had completely fallen away, revealing the petulant, cruel boy underneath. You insolent little," he hissed, his voice dropping so only I could hear. "I reject your proposal, Lord Fitzgerald," I declared, my voice ringing out for all to hear once more. "And I would advise you not to approach me again. Your presence is an insult to my family's honor." I turned on my heel, my crimson dress whipping around me, and walked away. I could hear the immediate, vicious eruption of whispers, laughter, and scandalized gossip tearing Neville's carefully constructed reputation to bloody shreds. It was a small victory. A tiny drop of water in an ocean of necessary vengeance. It was not enough. To truly destroy Neville, To unearth the deep-rooted conspiracy he was part of, I needed power. I needed military backing that existed entirely outside my father's sphere of influence. I needed a sword. I found him away from the bustling crowds, standing on a secluded stone balcony, overlooking the churning sea at the edge of the royal grounds. Prince Jean-Baptiste. He was a stark contrast to the glittering peacocks of the court. Tall, broad-shouldered, and clad in pragmatic dark leather and silver armor, he looked like a storm cloud that had taken human form. His hair was jet black, falling slightly over his piercing obsidian eyes. He was the commander of the vanguard, a man who had spent his youth defending the northern borders from monstrous incursions, while men like Neville drank wine and played politics. In my past life, his brooding silence had terrified me. I had thought him cold and cruel. Now, looking at the rigid set of his jaw, and the sheer dangerous power radiating from him, I realized he was simply a predator forced to stand among sheep. He turned as I approached, the faint clinking of his armor the only sound. His eyes widened imperceptibly as they dragged over my crimson dress, settling on my face. There was a flicker of something raw and intense in his gaze, before he masked it behind a wall of stoic indifference. "Lady Watson!" His voice was a deep, gravelly rumble that vibrated in the pit of my stomach. I saw the spectacle in the garden. You were remarkably thorough. "A diseased limb must be severed cleanly, Your Highness," I replied, stopping a few feet from him. He raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my lack of stuttering fear. "Indeed. Though I suspect you did not seek me out in this secluded corner to discuss the finer points of public execution."
No,
I said, meeting his dark eyes squarely. "I came to offer you a proposition, an alliance." John crossed his arms over his chest. "An alliance? Between the king's brother and the duke's daughter? And what exactly are we allying against?" "Against those who would see Astrea fall into ruin from the inside out," I said quietly, stepping closer so my words wouldn't carry over the crashing waves below. "You know as well as I do that the court is rotting. The king is ill. Lords like Neville Fitzgerald and his patron, the Chancellor, are quietly amassing power, diverting military funds to their own pockets, and preparing to make a move against the crown." John's posture shifted, the languid grace vanished, replaced by the coiled tension of a striking viper. He took a step toward me, towering over me. "Those are dangerous words, Gwen," he murmured, using my given name. It sent a strange shiver down my spine. "Treasonous words, if you lack proof." "I don't have all the proof yet," I admitted smoothly, "but I know where to find it. I know their timelines. I know their methods. I know Neville intends to frame my father for treason to seize the Watson military assets for the Chancellor's coup." John's eyes narrowed, assessing me. He was looking at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. In many ways he was. "And what do you need from me?" "Your absolute protection for my family while I dismantle them," I stated, "your royal authority to bypass the Chancellor's magistrates, and your sword when the time comes for blood." "You ask for a great deal, Lady Watson," he said softly, leaning closer. I could smell the faint scent of pine needles, steel, and a clean, masculine warmth. "And what do I get in return for risking my position to back you in this shadow war?" I looked up at him. I remembered the man in black armor, tearing through the execution square, screaming my name as the blade fell. I remembered the absolute world-ending grief in his eyes. "Me," I said simply. "You get me, and the entirety of House Watson's loyalty. When the dust settles, when Neville and the Chancellor are ash under our boots, my father will throw his absolute support behind you, cementing your power to reform this kingdom as you see fit." I paused, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I know you want the throne, John. I can help you take it." cleanly and legally. When the king passes, he went entirely still. The air between us seemed to crackle with static magic. Slowly, he reached up, his large calloused fingers gently brushing a stray lock of silver blonde hair behind my ear. The touch was terrifyingly tender, a stark contrast to his fearsome reputation. "You have changed since the dawn, Gwen," he whispered, his eyes burning with an intensity that took my breath away. "You went to sleep a fragile dove, and awoke as a dragon. Will you accept my terms, Your Highness?" I asked, refusing to break eye contact. A slow, dangerous smile curved his lips. It transformed his face, making him devastatingly handsome. "We have a deal, but know this, Gwen. If you bind yourself to me in this war, there is no stepping back. I do not let go of what is mine. Neither do I," I replied. The first phase of the war was not fought with swords, but with smiles, whispers, and poisoned tea. Lady Brianna Van Buren had not taken my insult in the garden lightly. She immediately began spinning a web of rumors, playing the tragic, weeping victim, claiming that the pressure of society had driven me mad, and that she only wept for her poor, deranged friend. It was a tactic that had worked flawlessly in my past life. Brianna's greatest weapon was her perceived harmlessness. I decided to strip her of it. I hosted an intimate afternoon tea in the grand solarium of the Watson estate, inviting the most influential gossips of the High Court, the Duchess of Redford, the Countess of Vane, and several others whose tongues were sharper than daggers. I also invited Brianna. She arrived looking like a bruised peach, all soft sighs and downcast eyes, sitting timidly at the edge of her plush chair. "It is so brave of you to host us, Gwen," Brianna said softly, stirring her tea, "especially after the exhaustion you suffered at the gala." "We are all so terribly worried about your state of mind." The other ladies exchanged knowing, pitying glances. I took a slow sip of my Earl Grey, smiling serenely. "My mind is perfectly clear, Brianna. Clarified, in fact. I have recently been doing some spring cleaning, going through my accounts and correspondence." Brianna's spoon clinked slightly against the porcelain. "It is amazing what one finds when one truly looks," I continued, setting my cup down. I signaled Tilly, who stepped forward carrying a silver tray. On it rested a stack of elegant perfumed parchment. "For instance," I said, my voice conversational, but carrying perfectly across the silent room, "I found these letters. It seems my former suitor, Lord Neville, is quite the prolific writer." Brianna's face went bone white. She recognized the ribbon binding the letters. It was the same blue ribbon she used for her hair. "Duchess Redford," I said gracefully, sliding a letter toward the older woman. "Would you be so kind as to read the highlighted portion?" "My eyes are a bit strained today." The Duchess, her eyes alight with the thrill of impending scandal, eagerly snatched the parchment. She cleared her throat. "My sweetest Brianna, the Watson fool suspects nothing. She buys you the very jewels you wear while you lie in my bed. Once I secure her father's ring, we shall dispose of her, and you shall take your rightful place as my Duchess." A collective gasp, far louder than the one at the garden party, sucked all the air from the solarium. Brianna leaped to her feet, knocking her teacup over. It shattered, brown liquid staining the pristine rug. That is a forgery! A lie! Gwen, how could you be so cruel as to fabricate such a thing? Fabricate? I stood up, my height giving me a commanding advantage over her trembling form. "I also brought the ledgers from the jeweler, Brianna. The sapphire necklace you are wearing right now. The one you claimed was a family heirloom? It was purchased by Neville Fitzgerald 3 weeks ago. The receipt is right here!" I slammed the ledger onto the table. The ladies in the room shrank away from Brianna as if she were carrying the plague. In Astrean high society, taking a lover was a scandal. Conspiring to murder a duke's daughter for her wealth while pretending to be her best friend was social and political suicide. You are a parasite, Brianna, I said, my voice dropping to a tone of pure ice. You fed on my kindness, slept in my home, and plotted my murder. You are no longer welcome in this house. You are no longer welcome in polite society. You can't do this, Brianna shrieked, her sweet facade violently crumbling, revealing the ugly, desperate ambition beneath. I have nothing. Where will I go? Perhaps Lord Neville will take you in, I suggested coldly, though I hear his estates are facing foreclosure. Now, get out before I have my guards drag you by your hair into the street. She fled, sobbing uncontrollably. The ladies at the table were already furiously whispering to one another, their eyes glittering with the destructive power of the information they had just acquired. By sunset, Brianna Van Buren would be a pariah, completely isolated, her reputation burned to cinders. Neville had lost his eyes and ears inside my house. The first limb had been severed. My alliance with Prince John evolved rapidly from a cold political pact into something terrifyingly deep, while I spent my days maneuvering through the political minefield, isolating Neville's allies, ruining his financial backers, and exposing the Chancellor's minor corruptions. John became my shadow. He placed his own elite guards around my family's estate. When I traveled to the city, his black carriage followed close behind. One evening, 3 months into our campaign, we were in his private study deep within the royal keep. We were hunched over a map of the city, tracking the movements of the Chancellor's private guard. I was exhausted. The constant vigilance, the weight of the memories of my death, was beginning to take its toll. I reached for a candle to pull it closer to the map, my hand slipping. The hot wax spilled directly across the back of my hand. I hissed, jerking back. Before I could even reach for a cloth, John was there. He moved with a speed that defied his massive frame. He grabbed my wrist, his grip firm but incredibly gentle, and pulled my hand toward him. Careful, he murmured, his brow furrowing in deep concern. He dipped a clean linen cloth into a basin of cold water on his desk, and carefully began to dab the cooling wax away from my reddened skin. I stared at his bent head, at the stark contrast between his battle-scarred hands and the feather-light way he treated me. In my past life, Neville had never noticed when I was hurt. If I complained, he found it annoying. It's just a burn, John, I said softly, my voice trembling slightly from the sudden, overwhelming proximity of him. He continued to clean the burn, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a small pot of healing salve, smoothing it over my skin. I have spent my life watching things bleed. Gwen, he said, his voice a low rumble. He finally looked up, his dark eyes locking onto mine. The raw intensity in them made the breath catch in my throat. I will not watch you bleed. Not for this kingdom. Not for revenge. Not for a careless candle. He didn't release my hand. Instead, he brought it slowly to his lips, pressing a warm, lingering kiss against my knuckles. A jolt of pure electricity shot up my arm. The business arrangement we had agreed upon dissolved in that instant, crumbling to dust under the weight of his gaze. I realized then that John was far more than just my sword. He was my shield. He was the anchor keeping me tethered to my humanity while I waded through the filth of my enemies. I leaned forward, closing the distance between us. I rested my free hand against his armored chest, feeling the heavy, steady thud of his heart. Then we must finish this quickly, I whispered. Before they can strike back. Tell me what you need, he said, his voice thickening with emotion. Tomorrow night, I said, my mind snapping back to the tactical reality. Neville plans to plant the forged treason documents in my father's study. I know exactly when his assassin will slip in. We are going to let him plant them, and then we are going to swap the documents. John smiled, a fierce, predatory baring of teeth. Swap them with what? With the ledgers proving Neville and the Chancellor have been funneling the crown's gold to the northern mercenaries, I replied. I secured them from Brianna's chambers before I threw her out. It seemed she was keeping them as blackmail material against Neville, just in case he ever tired of her. John threw his head back and laughed, a rich booming sound that filled the study. You are magnificent, Gwen. Terrifying but magnificent. The climax of my vengeance arrived not in a dark alley, but in the blinding light of the royal court. The king, pale and coughing into a silk handkerchief, sat upon the Astrean throne. The court was packed. My father stood near the front, looking bewildered but resolute. I stood slightly behind him, wearing a dress of midnight blue, my posture relaxed. Across the aisle stood Neville and the Chancellor. Neville looked haggard. The last 3 months had broken him. His finances were in ruins, his reputation was a joke, and his secret lover was begging on the streets of the lower city. But today, a triumphant, desperate gleam shone in his eyes. He believed he was about to play his winning hand. "Your Majesty," the Chancellor boomed, stepping forward. "It grieves me to bring this before the court, but the safety of the realm demands it. We have received undeniable intelligence that Duke Theodore Watson is conspiring with the northern barbarians to overthrow the crown." Uproar engulfed the hall. My father roared in outrage, his hand flying to the hilt of his sword. "Lies! Slander of the highest order! We have proof, Your Grace!" Neville shouted, stepping forward, playing the role of the reluctant patriot. "Last night, acting on anonymous tips, the King's Guard searched the Duke's private study. We found hidden compartments containing coded letters detailing troop movements and gold transfers to the enemy." The king coughed weakly, raising a trembling hand. "Bring forth the evidence." A King's Guard brought forward a heavy wooden box. Neville, barely able to contain his wicked smirk, opened it and withdrew a stack of parchment. He turned to face the court, raising the papers high. "These letters, bearing the Duke's own seal," Neville began, his voice ringing with victory. "Read them aloud." "Lord Fitzgerald," I interrupted, my voice slicing through the tense air. I stepped out from behind my father. "If my father is a traitor, let the entire court hear his treason." Neville sneered at me. "Gladly." He unrolled the top parchment. He cleared his throat. "To the commander of the Blood Axe clan." "Wait." Neville stopped. He blinked, bringing the parchment closer to his face. The triumphant smirk vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. His hands began to shake violently. "Read it, Neville," I commanded softly. This isn't," he stammered, dropping the paper as if it burned him. He grabbed another from the box. His eyes darted frantically over the text, the color completely drained from his face. "Cat got your tongue, nephew." Prince John stepped out from the shadows near the throne. He walked down the steps, entirely clad in his fearsome black armor, a terrifying avatar of justice. He picked up the dropped parchment. "Allow me," John said, his voice booming like thunder. "Record of transfer. 50,000 gold sovereigns from the royal treasury to the accounts of Lord Neville Fitzgerald, authorized by the Chancellor, to be forwarded to the mercenary companies of the North." Pandemonium erupted. The Chancellor tried to run, but John's personal guards, who had quietly positioned themselves at the exits, immediately subdued him, slamming him to the marble floor. "No! No! This is a trick!" Neville shrieked, his voice cracking hysterically. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "She did this. She planted those. You just swore before the king and the gods that these papers were found in my father's study by the King's Guard," I pointed out, my voice laced with venom. "Are you now claiming the King's Guard is corrupt? Or are you simply confessing to your own treason, Lord Fitzgerald?" Neville lunged at me, his face twisted in feral rage, producing a hidden dagger from his sleeve. He didn't make it 2 steps. Prince John moved with blinding speed. He simply caught Neville by the throat, lifting the grown man off the ground with one hand. Neville choked, dropping the dagger, his legs kicking uselessly in the air as John's iron grip slowly cut off his air. "You dare draw steel on my future wife?" John growled, his eyes burning with lethal intent. The court froze. Future wife. It was the first time he had declared it publicly. My heart soared, a fierce, triumphant beat against my ribs. The king, energized by the shock, slammed his scepter down. "Enough! Drop him, John!" "Guards, seize Lord Fitzgerald and the Chancellor, strip them of their titles, seize their lands, throw them in the deepest, darkest cells of the Black Tower to await execution for high treason." John threw Neville to the floor like discarded trash. Neville crawled on his hands and knees, weeping, begging, grabbing at my dress. "Gwen, please, I loved you. Have mercy." I looked down at the man who had ordered my slaughter in another lifetime. I felt no pity. I felt no anger. I felt only the profound, cleansing relief of a tumor being excised from my soul. "I have no mercy for traitors," I said coldly, stepping back so my dress would not be soiled by his tears. "Take him away!" As the guards dragged screaming Neville and the blubbering Chancellor from the hall, the heavy oppressive shadow that had hung over my family finally dissipated. The future was rewritten, the plot was dismantled. My family was safe. I felt a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder. I turned and looked up into Prince John's eyes. The fury was gone, replaced by an overwhelming protective warmth. "It is done," he said softly. "No," I replied, a genuine smile breaking across my face for the first time since I had awakened in this second life. I reached up and laced my fingers through his. "It is just beginning." 3 years later, the execution square where I had died in my first life was transformed. The cobblestones had been torn up, replaced by a massive garden of white lilies and silver roses. King John Baptiste sat upon the Astrean throne. His brother had passed peacefully, and with the complete financial and military backing of House Watson, John's ascension had been seamless and unchallenged. Astria was entering a golden age of prosperity and military security, and I sat beside him. Queen Guinevere. The crown upon my head was heavy, but the arm resting securely around my waist made it easy to bear. Rather than surviving the political machinations of the court, we had conquered them. Brianna Van Buren had vanished into obscurity. Neville had met the headsman's axe, a fate he truly deserved, and those who sought to harm my family were dust in the wind. I had returned from the ashes of betrayal to claim absolute power over my own destiny. I had forged myself in blood and fire, and in doing so, I had found a love that was equally unyielding. John leaned over, pressing a kiss to my temple, his thumb gently tracing the line of my jaw. "What are you thinking about, my queen?" I looked out, over the thriving, peaceful city, feeling the sun warm on my face. There were no ghosts here anymore. "I was just thinking," I smiled, leaning my head against his shoulder, "that the weather is incredibly beautiful today." The end. Modern Queen Tales presents An Offer He Couldn't Refuse. Chapter 1. The Devil's Bargain. The smell of antiseptic and stale coffee had become the defining scent of my existence. I sat in the hard plastic chair beside my brother's hospital bed, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of Aaron's thin chest. He was only 14, but the aggressive leukemia ravaging his body made him look like a fragile, hollowed-out ghost of the vibrant boy he used to be. I held his cold hand, tracing the faint blue veins beneath his translucent skin. "I'm going to fix this, Aaron," I whispered into the quiet hum of the machinery keeping him alive. "I promise you." But promises couldn't pay the mounting stack of bills on my kitchen counter. The experimental treatment Aaron needed, his only real shot at survival, was entirely out of pocket. My waitressing job and the meager savings I had scraped together were like throwing pennies into a bottomless well. The bank had laughed me out of their office when I begged for a loan. I was drowning, and the water was rising fast. That was when I remembered the whispers. Growing up on the bruised edges of the city, you heard things. You heard about the Marino family. You heard about Cal Marino, the enigmatic, ruthless Don who ruled the city's underworld with an iron fist and a heart made of frost. He was a phantom, a boogeyman to some, but to others, those desperate enough, he was the ultimate, terrifying lender of last resort. But I didn't want a loan. I knew I could never pay it back, and defaulting on Cal Marino meant ending up at the bottom of the river. I needed something else. I had heard a rumor, slipped from the lips of a drunken mob enforcer at the diner where I worked, that Cal Marino was under immense pressure from the syndicate's old guard. He needed an heir to solidify his power, but he refused to take a wife, viewing marriage as a vulnerability. He needed a vessel, a surrogate. It was a mad, desperate idea, a deal with the devil. But looking at Aaron's pale face, I knew I would walk through the fires of hell if it meant saving him. It took me 3 days to track down the avenue to reach him. I dressed in my best clothes, a modest black skirt and a white blouse, and walked into the Obsidian, an exclusive, members-only club in the heart of the financial district. I was patted down by men whose suits cost more than my life, and finally led into a dimly lit, sound-proofed office that smelled of expensive bourbon and old leather. Behind a massive mahogany desk sat Cal Marino. The breath caught in my throat. The rumors hadn't done him justice. He was breathtakingly handsome, but in a harsh, predatory way. His dark hair was swept back, his jawline looked as though it could cut glass, and his eyes, a deep, fathomless obsidian, locked onto me with a chilling intensity. He radiated power and a cold, suppressed violence. Emily Parker. His voice was a low, dark rumble that vibrated in my chest. My men tell me you've been asking very dangerous questions. You have exactly 2 minutes to explain why I shouldn't have you thrown out, or worse. I forced my knees to stop trembling. I stood tall, meeting his terrifying gaze. I'm here to make a business proposition, Mr. Marino. He leaned back, a cynical smirk playing on his lips. A waitress from the South Side has a business proposition for me. I'm listening, but the clock is ticking. I know you need an heir, I said, the words rushing out before I could lose my nerve. I know the syndicate wants your bloodline secured, but you don't want a wife to complicate your empire. I want to offer myself as a surrogate. Cal went perfectly still. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The predatory amusement vanished from his face, replaced by a sharp, assessing calculation. And what, he asked softly, dangerously, do you want in return? $2 million, I said, my voice remarkably steady, paid directly to Seattle Grace Hospital for my brother's treatment, plus living expenses until the baby is born. Once the child is delivered, I walk away. You get your heir, your legacy is secure, and I get my brother back. He stood up, slowly. He was massive, towering over me as he walked around the desk. He circled me like a wolf assessing a lamb. I held my breath as he stopped right in front of me. I could smell his cologne, sandalwood, and spice. You're asking for a fortune, he murmured, looking down at me. And you're offering to tie yourself to the most dangerous man in this city for 9 months. Do you have any idea what my world is like, lady? I don't care about your world, I retorted, lifting my chin. I care about Aaron. Will you do it? Cal stared into my eyes for a long, agonizing moment. He was looking for deception, for greed, but all I had to offer was pure, unadulterated desperation. A strictly professional arrangement, Cal finally said, his tone devoid of any emotion. You will live in my estate, you will be monitored. You will eat what my doctors tell you to eat, do what they tell you to do. There will be no emotional attachment. You are an incubator. Nothing more. The words stung, but I swallowed the humiliation. Agreed. Then we have a deal, Miss Parker. Your brother's treatment will be fully funded by tomorrow morning. I closed my eyes, a single tear of profound relief escaping down my cheek. I had sold my body, perhaps my soul, to the devil. But Aaron was going to live. Chapter 2. The Ice King's Fortress. Within 48 hours, my life changed beyond recognition. Aaron was transferred to the VIP wing of the hospital, the top specialists hovering over him. The relief was intoxicating. But the price of that relief was my freedom. I was moved into Cal's estate, a sprawling modern fortress nestled on the cliffs overlooking the ocean. It was surrounded by high concrete walls, electrified fencing, and armed guards who prowled the grounds like silent phantoms. My room was essentially a gilded cage. It was massive, decorated in cold, minimalist tones of gray and white. It felt like a high-end hotel room, devoid of any warmth or personality. The initial weeks were a blur of medical appointments. The IVF process was clinical, invasive, and emotionally exhausting. Throughout it all, Cal was a distant, imposing figure. We rarely saw each other. When we did cross paths in the massive dining room or the echoing hallways, his nods were curt. He was the Ice King, completely detached from the human element of our transaction. He was treating this exactly as he promised, a business deal. But as the weeks turned into a month, the isolation began to wear on me. I spent my days reading in the vast library, walking the manicured gardens under the watchful eyes of the guards, and calling Aaron, whose voice was already sounding stronger. Then, the morning came when I stared down at the little plastic stick on my bathroom vanity. 2 pink lines. I was pregnant with the mafia boss's child. My hands shook as I sat on the edge of the large marble bathtub. A strange, complicated knot of emotions tightened in my chest. This went beyond a mere business. There was a life growing inside me. Later that evening, I was summoned to Cal's study. He was sitting behind his desk, reviewing documents. He looked up as I entered, his dark eyes assessing me. "The doctor called," Cal said, his voice as smooth and cold as glass. He confirmed the test results. "You're pregnant." "Yes," I said quietly, clasping my hands in front of me. Cal stood up and poured himself a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He didn't offer me any, obviously. He took a sip, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the dark ocean. "Your diet will be adjusted tomorrow. You will no longer walk near the cliff edge, even with the guards. The perimeter of your daily walks is restricted to the inner courtyard," he commanded. I bristled. "I'm pregnant, Cal, not an invalid. I need fresh air." He turned his head slowly, his eyes flashing with a sudden, sharp intensity. It was the first time I had called him by his first name. "You are carrying my blood." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "You will do exactly as I say." My enemies would love nothing more than to find a vulnerability to exploit. "You are now the most valuable asset in this house. You will be protected as such." "I'm not an asset," I snapped back, my hormones and frustration getting the better of my fear. "I'm a human being." Cal stared at me, visibly taken aback by my defiance. Most people cowed in his presence. For a second, I thought he might explode. Instead, a strange, almost imperceptible shift occurred in his expression. The ice cracked, just a fraction. He looked down at my flat stomach, then back up to my eyes. "Go to bed, Emily." "It's late." It was the first time he had used my first name, too. Chapter 3. The Thaw. The pregnancy hit me hard in the first trimester. The morning sickness was debilitating. I spent days curled up on the bathroom tiles, unable to keep anything down. One afternoon, I was leaning over the sink, splashing cold water on my face, feeling utterly miserable and alone. The door to my suite opened. I jumped, turning to see Cal standing in the doorway. He looked entirely out of place in my bathroom, his dark suit a stark contrast to the white marble. He frowned deeply at my pale face and trembling frame. "You look terrible," he observed bluntly.
"Thank you,"
I croaked, wiping my mouth with a towel.
"Your charm is boundless."
To my shock, he didn't leave. Instead, he stepped into the bathroom. He reached out, his large, warm hand wrapping gently around my elbow, supporting my weight. The contact sent a jolt of electricity up my arm. "Come," he said softly. He guided me back to the bed and helped me lie down. He pulled the heavy duvet over me. Then, he picked up a sleek black phone from the nightstand and pressed a button. "Bring up ginger tea, real ginger, not the powdered trash, and dry toast, now." He barked into the receiver. He sat on the edge of my bed. The sheer size of him made the king-sized mattress dip. I stared at him in quiet astonishment. The ruthless crime lord was playing nurse. "You don't have to be here," I mumbled, closing my eyes against the spinning room. "I protect what's mine," he replied, though the words lacked their usual icy sting. "I'm not yours. The baby is." Cal was silent for a long time. When I opened my eyes, he was staring at my face, an unreadable expression in his dark depths. Slowly, he reached out, his fingers brushing a stray strand of sweaty hair away from my forehead. His touch was incredibly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence he was known for. "Get some sleep, Emily," he murmured. From that day on, the dynamic shifted. The Ice King began to melt, drop by drop. He started joining me for dinner, demanding I eat properly. When I complained about backaches in my second trimester, he silently replaced my mattress with a state-of-the-art orthopedic one. When a maid accidentally bumped into me in the hallway, Cal's roar of fury echoed through the house. And he would have fired her on the spot if I hadn't intervened and begged him not to. He was becoming fiercely, instinctively protective of me, and to my absolute horror, I was beginning to look forward to his presence. I saw the man beneath the monster, a man burdened by immense power, fiercely loyal, and surprisingly tender. I was falling in love with a man who had bought my womb. Chapter 4. The Viper. As my belly swelled, confirming the success of our arrangement to the outside world, Cal decided it was time to introduce me to his inner circle. He hosted a formal dinner at the estate for his capos and trusted associates. That was the night I met Monica Rossi. She was the daughter of an allied mafia boss, a breathtakingly beautiful socialite, with venom in her veins. She wore a blood-red gown that left little to the imagination, and moved with the arrogant grace of a woman used to getting her way. Rumor had it she had been grooming herself to be Cal's wife for years, viewing it as a strategic merger. My presence and my pregnant belly was a massive insult to her ambitions. She cornered me in the powder room, while Cal was deep in discussion with Roberto, his second in command. Roberto was a slick, handsome man with eyes that never quite stopped calculating. I never liked the way he looked at me, so... Monica purred, leaning against the marble counter and examining her perfect manicure. "You're the incubator. I must say, Cal's tastes have plummeted. A street rat from the south side?" I washed my hands calmly, refusing to let her see she rattled me. "I'm carrying his child, Monica. That's all you need to know." "Oh, don't get too comfortable, sweetie," she sneered, her eyes dropping to my stomach. "Once you pop that kid out, you'll be thrown back into the gutter where you belong. Cal doesn't do feelings, he does business. And you're just a transaction. He'll need a real woman, a queen to stand beside him, not a paid vessel." Her words hit my deepest insecurities perfectly. I felt a flush of humiliation rise in my cheeks. Suddenly, the bathroom door swung open. Cal stood there, his face like thunder. He had evidently heard the tail end of the conversation. The sheer, lethal coldness rolling off him made the air in the room feel thin. He walked past Monica without even looking at her and stopped beside me. He placed a large, possessive hand on the small of my back, drawing me flush against his side. "Emily," Cal said, his voice quiet and deadly, "is there a problem here?" "No," I said softly, though I leaned into his warmth gratefully. Cal finally turned his gaze to Monica. The beautiful socialite actually took a physical step back, her confidence shattering under his glare. "Monica," Cal said, each word dripping with disdain. "If you ever speak to the mother of my child like that again, I will forget my alliance with your father, and I will cut your tongue out of your head. Do you understand me?" Monica paled, her mouth opening and closing in shock. "Cal, I was just... Get out," he commanded softly. Monica fled. Cal turned to me, his expression softening instantly. "Are you all right?" "Yes," I breathed. He reached down, his hand hovering over my swollen belly before resting gently against it. He felt a kick, and a rare, genuine smile touched his lips. It made him look devastatingly handsome. "She's right about one thing," Cal murmured, his thumb stroking my side. "I don't do feelings." He looked up, his obsidian eyes locking onto mine, burning with an intensity that made my heart race. "But I think I'm making an exception." Chapter 5. Crossfire. The reality of Cal's world shattered our fragile domestic bubble violently in my 7th month. Cal had insisted on taking me to a private, heavily guarded clinic for a specialized ultrasound. We were in the back of his armored SUV, the city blurring past. Cal was holding my hand, a habit he had developed recently that he never bothered to explain. Suddenly, a massive black truck ran a red light, slamming directly into the side of our lead security vehicle. The explosion rocked our SUV. "Get down!" Cal roared. Before I could process what was happening, he unbuckled his seatbelt and practically threw himself over me, using his massive body as a human shield. Automatic gunfire erupted, bullets pinging furiously against the bulletproof glass of our SUV. My heart hammered against my ribs. I screamed as a high-caliber round finally spiderwebbed the window next to us. "Drive! Get us out of the kill zone!" Cal bellowed at the driver over the deafening noise. Our driver floored the gas, the heavy SUV ramming through a blockade of enemy cars. I was crushed beneath Cal, trembling uncontrollably, terrified for my life and the life of the baby. "I've got you," Cal rasped in my ear, his grip on me iron tight. "I've got you, Emily. I won't let them touch you." We managed to lose the pursuers in the winding industrial district, arriving at one of Cal's underground safe houses. We were ushered inside by frantic guards. Once the heavy steel doors locked behind us, Cal finally pulled back. He checked me over frantically, his hands running down my arms, my face, my belly. "Are you hurt? Tell me you're not hurt," he demanded, his voice rough with a panic I had never heard before. I'm okay, I gasped. Tears streaming down my face, Cal let out a ragged breath and pulled me into a crushing embrace. He buried his face in my neck, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. I wrapped my arms around his broad shoulders, burying my face in his chest. In the middle of a war zone, smelling of gunpowder and fear, I realized something profound. I felt entirely, perfectly safe in the arms of a mafia boss. Later, as I sat on a sofa drinking water, I overheard Cal talking to Roberto on a secure line in the next room. "The shipment at the docks is exposed, boss," Roberto was saying. "If you don't go secure it now, the Russians will seize $20 million worth of weapons." "Let them," Cal snarled without hesitation. "I am not leaving this safe house until I know my family is secure. Double the guards on Emily. If the Russians want the guns, they can have them. My priority is here. He chose me. He chose our baby over his business." The realization made my chest ache with a love so fierce it terrified me. Chapter 6. The Pathetic Ploy. The attack had escalated tensions within the syndicate. Cal was ruthlessly hunting down those responsible, leaving the estate more often. During his absences, the atmosphere in the house grew toxic. The guards, normally stoic, seemed to look at me with suspicion. I caught whispers in the hallways. Then, the storm broke. Cal returned early one evening. I was reading in the living room when the double doors burst open. Cal strode in, his face a mask of absolute terrifying fury. But he wasn't alone. Monica was trailing behind him, flanked by Roberto. Monica had a smug, triumphant smirk on her face. "What's going on?" I asked, struggling to stand up with my heavy belly. Cal walked right up to me. He didn't look angry at me. He looked furious at the world. He threw a thick manila folder onto the coffee table. Photographs spilled out. They were pictures of me, secretly meeting with a man in the gardens, a man I didn't recognize. There were printouts of bank transfers, showing large sums of money moving from a Russian syndicate account into a shell account under my name. There was a burner phone in a plastic evidence bag. "We found the phone in her mattress, boss," Roberto said gravely, playing the loyal soldier perfectly. "She's been feeding the Russians your roots. That's how they knew where you were going the day of the ambush. She sold you out for a bigger payday." Monica stepped forward, putting a delicate hand on her chest. "I'm so sorry, Cal. I tried to warn you. You brought a street rat into your home, and she bit the hand that fed her." I stared at the photos in shock. "Cal, I don't know who that man is. I've never seen him." "I've never owned that phone." I looked up at him desperately. "You have to believe me." The trope in the movies always dictated this was the moment the hero doubted the heroine, the moment the misunderstanding tore them apart. I braced myself for Cal's rejection, my heart breaking. Cal stared down at the photos. Then, he looked at the burner phone. Slowly, the fury on his face melted into an expression of utter chilling amusement. He began to laugh. It was a dark, dangerous sound. He turned to Monica. "You went through all this trouble," Cal said softly, "to forge banking records, hire a body double for Emily in the dark, and plant a cheap burner phone in a room monitored by my personal closed-circuit security?" Monica's smug smile faltered. "Cal, the evidence is right there!" In a flash of movement so fast I barely registered it, Cal's hand shot out. Crack! The sound of his palm striking Monica's cheek echoed like a gunshot through the massive room. Monica shrieked, stumbling backward and collapsing onto the floor, clutching her face. Roberto lunged forward, but Cal shot him a look so murderous it froze the second in command in his tracks. "Did you honestly believe?" Cal roared, his voice shaking the crystal chandelier above us. "That I am stupid enough to fall for this pathetic amateur manipulation." He stepped toward the cowering Monica, his fists clenched. "Emily doesn't care about money. She sold herself to me to save her dying brother. She shielded my child with her body during that ambush. Furthermore, my security cameras caught your little rat planting that phone 3 hours ago." Monica sobbed on the floor, her red lipstick smeared. "I should kill you right here," Cal hissed. "But you aren't worth the blood on my rugs." "Get out of my house, Monica. If I ever see your face in this city again, I will send you back to your father in pieces. Guards!" "Throw this trash out." 2 burly guards dragged a sobbing, terrified Monica out of the room. Cal took a deep, shuddering breath, composing himself. He turned his back on Roberto, who was pale and sweating, and walked over to me. He dropped to his knees in front of me, wrapping his arms around my waist and pressing his face against my pregnant belly. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry you had to see that. I'm sorry I let a snake into our home." I ran my fingers through his dark hair, tears of relief falling freely. He hadn't doubted me for a single second. "I love you," I breathed, the truth slipping out before I could stop it. Cal froze. He slowly pulled back, looking up at me. His obsidian eyes were wide, vulnerable. "Say it again," he commanded softly. "I love you, Cal. A beautiful broken smile spread across his face. Before he could respond, the sound of breaking glass and a concussive blast rocked the front of the house. Chapter 7. Blood and Water. Alarms shrieked through the estate. Cal was on his feet instantly. A heavy Glock materialized in his hand from a shoulder holster. What the hell was that? Cal barked at Roberto, but Roberto had drawn his own weapon, and it was pointed directly at Cal's chest. Behind him, 3 of Cal's supposedly loyal guards raised their rifles, aiming them at us. "It's a change in management, boss," Roberto sneered, his mask of loyalty completely gone. "Monica might be an idiot, but her father's money funded this little coup. You've gotten soft, Cal, letting a pregnant whore dictate your business. The men are tired of it." My breath hitched. The paranoia, the hostility in the house, it hadn't been about Monica. It had been Roberto poisoning the well, turning the men against Cal by claiming I was making him weak. Suddenly, a blinding, agonizing pain ripped through my abdomen. I gasped, clutching my stomach and collapsing onto the sofa. A gush of warm fluid soaked my legs. My water had broken. I was going into labor, surrounded by traitors with guns. "Emily!" Cal yelled, glancing at me with pure terror. "Don't move, Cal!" Roberto warned, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Drop the gun. We're going to make this quick. Then I'll deal with the woman and the bastard she's carrying." That was Roberto's fatal mistake. He threatened the baby. I saw the exact moment the man I loved vanished, replaced entirely by the mythical, terrifying Don Marino. Cal didn't just drop the gun, he threw it directly at Roberto's face as a distraction, simultaneously diving to the side. Gunfire erupted, deafening and chaotic. The living room was torn to shreds. Vases exploded, pillows burst into clouds of feathers. I screamed, curling into a tight ball on the sofa, shielding my belly as another massive contraction hit me like a freight train. Cal was a blur of lethal precision. He rolled behind a marble pillar, drawing a backup weapon from his ankle. 2 sharp cracks, and 2 of the traitorous guards dropped dead. Roberto panicked, firing wildly. Cal moved like a predator, flanking him. Roberto turned just in time to see Cal emerge from the smoke. Cal tackled Roberto to the ground with the force of a battering ram. The 2 men struggled brutally. I cried out in pain as another contraction tore through me, gripping the armrest until my knuckles turned white. With a sickening crunch, Cal shattered Roberto's wrist, taking the gun. He pinned his second-in-command to the blood-soaked rug. "You thought she made me weak?" Cal snarled, his face splattered with blood, his eyes burning with demonic fury. "She is the mother of my child. She made me lethal." Cal pulled the trigger. Roberto went limp. The house was still ringing with echoes, thick with the smell of cordite and copper. Outside, I could hear Cal's loyal men, the ones who hadn't turned, shouting and securing the perimeter. The coup had failed. Cal dropped the gun and rushed to my side. He scooped me up into his massive arms as easily as if I weighed nothing. "Hold on, sweetheart, hold on," he chanted frantically, carrying me through the ruined house toward the secure underground garage. "I've got you. You're safe." "Cal, it hurts," I sobbed, clutching his ruined, bloody shirt. "The baby is coming now. We're going to the clinic." "My men are clearing the road," he promised, his jaw set in grim determination. The drive was a nightmare of pain and adrenaline. Cal held me in the back of the SUV, shouting at the driver, whispering soothing words in my ear, his hands shaking slightly as he wiped the sweat from my brow. Chapter 8. The Air and the Heart. 20 hours later, the chaos of the Mafia war felt like a distant, fading nightmare. I lay in a pristine hospital bed, utterly exhausted, every muscle aching, but filled with a radiant, overwhelming joy. In my arms lay a tiny, perfect little boy. He had a shock of dark hair and the promise of his father's features. The door to the private suite opened quietly. Cal walked in. He had cleaned up, though he looked exhausted. The bruises on his face from the fight with Roberto were stark against his pale skin. But, as his eyes landed on me and the bundle in my arms, his entire demeanor softened into something profoundly beautiful. He walked over slowly, as if approaching a sacred altar. He sat on the edge of the bed, leaning in to look at his son. A single tear slipped down the cheek of the ruthless mafia boss. He reached out a trembling finger, and the baby instinctively curled his tiny fist around it. "He's beautiful," Cal whispered, his voice cracking. "You did so well, Emily. I am so proud of you. He has your nose." I smiled weakly. Cal looked up from the baby to me. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I recognized the heavy stock instantly. It was our surrogacy contract. The document that stated I was nothing more than an incubator, to be paid and dismissed. Slowly, deliberately, Cal ripped the contract in half, then in quarters. He tossed the pieces into the nearby trash can. My heart leapt into my throat. "Cal?" He took my free hand, kissing my knuckles gently. "The contract is void," Cal said softly, his dark eyes shining with intense emotion. "Because I am a selfish, greedy man. I want a family." He shifted closer, his gaze burning into my soul. "You told me you loved me," he murmured. I didn't get to answer before all hell broke loose. "Emily, you came into my life looking to save your brother, and you ended up saving me. You melted the ice. You made me human again." "I am entirely, completely in love with you," I gasped, tears of joy welling in my eyes. Cal reached into his pocket again, this time pulling out a velvet box. He flipped it open to reveal a diamond ring so large and flawless it caught the hospital lights like a star. "Marry me, Emily," he pleaded, the man who commanded thousands begging a waitress for her hand. "Not a business deal, not an arrangement, a real marriage. Be my wife, be the queen of this family. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of you and our son." I looked at the man who had torn apart his own empire to keep me safe. The man who was now looking at me with absolute devotion. "Yes," I cried, a watery laugh escaping my lips. "Yes, Cal, I'll marry you." He slid the ring onto my finger, leaned in, and kissed me. It was the tender, reverent kiss of a husband. Epilogue. The sun shone brightly over the manicured lawns of the Marino estate. It had been 2 years since the night the world almost ended. The syndicate had been purged of its rot. With Roberto gone and Monica exiled, Cal had solidified his power, but he had changed the way he ruled. The violence had decreased, replaced by smarter, more legitimate business ventures. The Ice King was still feared, but he was respected more than ever. I sat on a woven blanket on the grass, watching as my brother Aaron, now 16, completely in remission, and sporting a full head of curly hair, ran across the lawn, chasing a toddler who was giggling uncontrollably. Little Aiden Marino was a tiny terror, fast on his feet and already showing his father's stubborn streak. "I still can't believe you beat him in a foot race," a deep, warm voice said from behind me. I leaned back as Cal sat down behind me, pulling me back against his broad chest. He wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. He was wearing casual clothes, jeans, and a soft gray sweater, looking nothing like a crime boss and everything like a devoted father. "Aaron's getting faster." I smiled, leaning my head against Cal's neck. "The doctors say he's perfectly healthy." "I told you I'd take care of it," Cal murmured, kissing the shell of my ear. "You took care of all of us," I replied, turning my head to catch his lips in a soft kiss. We watched our son tackle his uncle into the grass, both of them erupting into laughter. Cal tightened his grip on me, burying his face in my hair and inhaling deeply. "I love you, Mrs. Marino," he whispered against my skin. "I love you too." "Mr. Marino," I replied. I had walked into the devil's lair hoping for a miracle to save my brother. Instead, I had found my husband, the father of my children, and a love that was stronger than fear, stronger than violence, and built to last a lifetime. I had tamed the monster, and in return, he had given me the world.
Modern Queen Tales presents Take It Back. The cardboard box is the universal, humiliating symbol of corporate betrayal. I stood in the center of my sleek, glass-walled office at Bergman Design.
Well, my former office, staring at the pathetic brown cube they had provided for my worldly possessions. 5 years of my life, reduced to a handful of ergonomic pens, a framed photo of my dog, and a collection of fabric swatches I couldn't bear to leave behind. It's nothing personal, Caroline, Norman Bergman had said just 20 minutes earlier. He had been standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the boardroom, looking out over the city skyline like he was some tech bro visionary, rather than a man who had inherited his father's moderately successful lifestyle brand and coasted on the brilliance of his creative team. If it's not personal, Norman, what exactly is it? I had asked, my voice terrifyingly calm, even as my pulse hammered in my throat. Beside me, Kaylee, my lead textile engineer, and Maddox, my head of industrial design, were frozen in shock. We were the holy trinity of Bergman Design. We were the reason the company had won 3 national design awards in the last 2 years. Its evolution, Norman said, turning around with a smug, self-satisfied smile that made me want to throw my overpriced matcha latte at his tailored suit. The landscape is changing. I've run the projections. Do you know how much capital we tie up in prototyping? In material sourcing? In human error? You mean in the actual creation of products? Maddox had asked, his thick, calloused hands balling into fists. I mean in legacy processes. Norman corrected smoothly. I've decided to pivot the company. We are moving entirely to AI-driven generation. With the new models, I can generate 10,000 product designs in an hour. I can test them in virtual environments. I don't need a textile engineer. I don't need an industrial designer. And, Caroline, he paused, offering a look of faux sympathy. I don't need a chief product designer. A single prompt engineer can do the work of this entire floor. You can't manufacture a JPEG, Norman. I had warned him. AI doesn't understand physics. It doesn't understand the drape of silk or the tensile strength of walnut. It just knows how to steal pixels and mash them together into something that looks pretty on a screen. Our new manufacturing partners overseas will figure out the logistics. Norman dismissed with a wave of his hand. The severance packages are generous. I suggest you take them. And just like that, it was over. Now, standing in my apartment 3 days later, surrounded by the remnants of my career, the generous severance package felt like blood money. I hadn't showered in 2 days. I was wearing sweatpants that had lost their elasticity sometime during the Obama administration, and my diet consisted entirely of leftover pad thai and Spite. I aggressively scrolled through my phone. Doom scrolling to numb my brain. My feed was a graveyard of targeted ads. But recently, something had shifted. Ever since the boom of AI image generators, my timeline was flooded with impossible products. I paused on a sponsored post from a brand called Ethereal Wonders. It was a video of a woman twirling in a dress that seemed to be made of spun starlight. The fabric shifted from deep midnight blue to a brilliant, glowing amethyst as she moved. The bodice looked like it was woven from liquid glass, defying gravity and logic. The price tag? $29.99. I clicked the comments. It was a bloodbath. Scam. I ordered this and got a printed polyester tube that smells like gasoline. Total bait and switch. The image is AI. Don't fall for it. I wish this was real. It's so beautiful in the picture, but what I got was literally a Halloween costume from the dollar store. I stared at the image. The commenter was right. It was beautiful. The AI, unburdened by the laws of physics or the limitations of a sewing machine, had dreamed up something breathtaking. It had stolen elements of haute couture, bioluminescence, and fantasy art, smashing them together into a garment that women desperately wanted. They wanted it so badly, they were willing to throw away $30 on the microscopic chance it might be real. I sat up. The leftover pad thai suddenly forgotten. I zoomed in on the dress. The AI didn't understand how to make it, but I did. My mind began to race, the gears clicking into place with a speed that made me dizzy. The liquid glass bodice? Clear PVC boning overlaid with a specialized holographic organza. The color-shifting skirt? Layered iridescent chiffon over a micro-LED mesh lining powered by a coin cell battery pack hidden in the waistband. It wouldn't cost $29. It would cost closer to $600. But it could be done. I swiped back to my feed. Next ad. A coffee table that looked like a slice of a geode, the center glowing with a soft, pulsing light, the wooden legs twisting like vines in a way that defied standard woodworking techniques. Comments: fake. Bought it. Got a cheap plastic stool with a sticker on it. I took a screenshot. I knew how to make that too. Steam bent ashwood, a custom poured epoxy resin river with encapsulated phosphorescent powder. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Norman Bergman thought AI was the end of the line for creators. He thought the generation of the image was the product. But he was wrong. The image was just a promise. A promise that the scammers were breaking millions of times a day. What if someone actually kept the promise? I didn't wait to brush my hair. I grabbed my keys, my iPad, and ran out the door. "You look like a crazy person," Kaylee said, taking a sip of her cappuccino. We were sitting in a small, dimly lit cafe in Brooklyn. Maddox was sitting next to her, looking equally exhausted, tracing the wood grain of the table with his thumb. "I am a crazy person," I said, slamming my iPad down on the table between them. "But I'm a crazy person with a plan." I pulled up the screenshot of the starlight dress. "Look at this. AI garbage," Kaylee scoffed, rolling her eyes. "The draping is physically impossible. Look at the hemline. It clips into the floor, and the lighting source makes no sense." "Exactly," I said. "It's fake." Millions of people see this ad every week. Hundreds of thousands of them click on it. Tens of thousands of them buy it, hoping against hope that it's real, and they receive a cheap, flammable nightmare. I swiped to the next image. The geode table. Maddox squinted at it. "The structural integrity of those legs is a joke. Put a heavy book on that and it snaps. But look at it, Maddox. Do you want it in your living room?" He hesitated, then sighed. "Yeah, it's gorgeous, but it's not real." "We are going to make it real," I said. The words tasted like electricity on my tongue. Both of them stopped and stared at me. "Caroline," Kaylee started, her tone adopting the soothing cadence one uses with a feral animal. "You can't compete with these drop-shipping scammers. They are churning out thousands of these fake ads a day. I don't want to compete with them on volume," I said, leaning in. "I want to hijack their demand. The AI is doing free market research for us. It's generating wild, impossible concepts, and the market is voting with their credit cards on which ones they desperately want to exist. The scammers are taking their money and leaving them furious. We are going to step in and give them what they actually ordered." I pulled out my notebook and flipped it open. I had spent the last 8 hours doing furious, messy sketches. "Kaylee, look at the bodice of that dress. If we use a structured corset base, overlay it with sheer silk organza, and use a fiber optic weave for the skirt, can we replicate the visual effect?" Kaylee leaned over the notebook, her professional instincts overriding her skepticism. Her eyes darted across my notes. "Not exactly like the picture, but close. If we source the fiber optics from that supplier we used in Milan 2 years ago, we could create a programmable light shift. It would be heavy though. We design it as formal evening wear. Weight is acceptable, I countered. Maddox, the table, steam bending? Maddox was already nodding, pulling a pencil from behind his ear. Steam bending for the primary supports. But I'd need to reinforce the core with a steel rod to maintain the aesthetic thinness without sacrificing structural integrity. The resin pour is easy, but getting the bioluminescence right means we need high-grade strontium aluminate powder. Can we build prototypes? I asked, looking between them. With what money, Caro? Maddox asked gently. We just got fired. With my severance package, I said without hesitation. And my savings. I'll fund the materials. I'll pay your usual rates. We build 3 items, 1 dress, 1 piece of furniture, 1 accessory, the holy trinity of scam ads. We film the entire process. We show the sweat, the materials, the reality of it, and then we sell them. Kaylee looked at Maddox. Maddox looked at Kaylee. Slowly, a smirk spread across Kaylee's face. Norman told me my expertise was obsolete. Norman is an idiot who thinks a computer can sew. I replied. Maddox snapped his pencil in half, the sound sharp like a starting pistol. Let's build some impossible things. We worked out of a rented warehouse space in Queens that smelled permanently of dust and old brick. For 3 weeks we practically lived there. We chose our first 3 targets carefully, selecting the most pervasive viral scam ads on the internet. The first was the Nebula gown. Kaylee worked miracles. She sourced a fiber optic fabric originally designed for stage productions and painstakingly hand-sewed it into a custom corset. When we finally plugged the battery pack in and turned off the warehouse lights, Maddox and I actually gasped. The dress didn't just glow, it breathed. It shifted from deep indigo to violent magenta, the light catching the sheer layers of silk organza and diffusing into a soft ethereal halo. It was better than the AI image because it had texture. It had weight. It was real. The second was the Lotus Lounge chair, an AI fever dream of curved wood that looked like a blooming flower, previously sold online for $49 and delivered as a tiny plastic dollhouse chair. Maddox spent days over a steam box, wrestling thick pieces of ash wood into impossible arcs, burning his hands more than once. He engineered a hidden steel skeleton that made the chair incredibly sturdy while maintaining the illusion of delicate floating petals. We upholstered it in rich emerald velvet. Sitting in, it felt like being held by the earth itself. The third was an accessory, the dragon scale handbag. The AI ad showed a bag that seemed to literally ripple and change texture as the light hit it. The scammers sent out cheap plastic bags printed with a snake pattern. I took charge of this one. I found a supplier of laser-cut dichroic leather. I designed a rigid geometric shell and meticulously hand-riveted hundreds of overlapping color-shifting leather scales to it. When you walked with it, the bag flashed from gold to green to fiery copper. When the prototypes were finished, we were exhausted, broke, and triumphant. Now what? Kaylee asked, nursing a blister on her thumb as we stared at our creations. Now, I said, pulling out my phone and a professional lighting ring, we take it back. I set up my phone. I didn't hire a model. We couldn't afford one. I put on the Nebula gown, did my own makeup, and stood in the center of the warehouse. I hit record on TikTok. I didn't dance. I didn't use a trending audio. I just stood there in the dark and pressed the button on the battery pack. The dress bloomed into starlight. I spun slowly, letting the camera capture the heavy, luxurious swoosh of the silk, the intricate construction of the bodice, the undeniable reality of the garment. Then, I spliced the video. The first 3 seconds was the original AI scam ad with the caption, "What you ordered." The next segment was my video, in high definition, with the caption, what you wanted. I added a voiceover. You've seen the ads. You've seen the impossible designs generated by computers. You've probably been scammed by the companies selling them. I'm Caroline. I'm a real designer. And my team and I decided to take those lies and make them real. I showed quick, hyperlapsed clips of our process. Maddox wrestling the steaming wood. Kaylee at the sewing machine, her hands flying over the glowing fabric. Me, hammering rivets into the dragon scale bag. We don't use AI to make our products, my voiceover concluded. We use human hands, real materials, and actual physics. The scammers lied to you. We're taking it back. Introducing TIB Real Products. Real magic. I linked the brand new website I had built the night before. I set the dress at $850, the chair at $1,200, and the bag at $400. They were pre-orders, clear terms stating a 6-week lead time for handcrafting. I took a deep breath, looked at Kaylee and Maddox, and hit post. Let's go get a drink. I said, it's going to take a while for the algorithm to pick it up. I was wrong. By the time we ordered our second round of margaritas at the corner bar, my phone was warm to the touch. The notifications weren't just pinging, they were an endless solid vibration. I pulled it out, my screen a blur of activity, 1.2 million views, 400,000 likes, 25,000 comments. Caroline, Maddox said, looking at his own phone, where he was logged into our Shopify backend. His face was pale. Caroline, look at this. He turned the screen toward me. Sales, $142,000. Kaylee choked on her drink. What? In 2 hours? People are desperate. I whispered, watching the number tick up to $145,000 right before my eyes. They're so tired of the internet being fake. By morning, the video had 12 million views. We had to close the pre-orders for the dress because we had sold out of our capacity for the next 3 months. We had $500,000 in revenue. TIB was born. And it was a monster. The next 6 months were a blur of sawdust, silk, and pure, unfiltered adrenaline. We moved out of the dusty warehouse and leased a massive, beautiful industrial space with skylights and exposed brick. The genuine thrill of our viral launch was exhilarating, but fulfilling those orders required a brutal, unyielding grind. But it was a good grind. It was the work we were meant to do. We realized very quickly that 3 people couldn't fulfill 1,000 orders. So, we hired. But we didn't just hire anyone. The city was full of incredibly talented, classically trained artisans who were being pushed out by fast fashion and cheap imported furniture. We hired master seamstresses, expert leatherworkers, and veteran carpenters. We paid them well above market rate, offered full benefits, and treated them like royalty. The workshop became a symphony of creation. The hum of industrial sewing machines, the sharp whine of the bandsaw, the rhythmic tapping of leather mallets. Every day, I walked the floor, breathing in the scent of cut wood, hot iron, and genuine leather. We kept dropping new products. Every time an AI scam ad went viral on social media, we targeted it. They promised a coat made of liquid mercury. We made one using a specialized ultra-reflective lame coated in a flexible, transparent elastomer. They promised a bookshelf that looked like a spiraling DNA helix floating off the wall. Maddox engineered it using aircraft-grade aluminum brackets and counterweighted shelving, and every time we dropped a video showing the scam versus reality, the internet lost its collective mind. TIB wasn't just a brand anymore, it was a crusade. We were the anti-AI, pro-human rebellion in the retail space. Our waitlists were thousands of people long. Celebrities were seen wearing our dragon scale bags. Meanwhile, Norman Bergman was learning a very hard, very expensive lesson. I kept tabs on Bergman design. It was impossible not to. The industry trade magazines were having a field day with his spectacular implosion. Norman had fired his creative team and hired prompt engineers. They generated tens of thousands of designs. They sent them to overseas manufacturers. But AI doesn't understand structural tolerances. Bergman Design released a line of dining chairs that looked stunning on their website. But when customers sat in them, the legs, which the AI had designed without cross-bracing to look minimalist, snapped. People were getting hurt. They released a line of summer dresses. The AI had generated a complex asymmetrical zipper pattern. The factory, lacking technical guidance, sewed the zippers straight through the armholes. The dresses couldn't be worn. Refunds skyrocketed. Lawsuits were filed for false advertising, as the products received looked absolutely nothing like the pristine AI-generated renders on the website. Norman's stock plummeted by 40% in 3 months. It was deeply, profoundly satisfying, but I knew it wasn't enough. The internet is a cynical place, and as TIB grew larger, the skeptics grew louder. A prominent YouTube commentary channel dropped a video titled, "Is TIB the Ultimate Scam?" The premise was simple. Our products looked too good. Our videos had to be CGI. We were just running a high-tier version of the very scam we claimed to be fighting, using clever editing to make people think these magical items existed. "They're calling us fakes," Kaylee said, slamming her laptop shut in my office. She looked furious. "After all the blood and sweat we put into this place, they think we're just rendering this stuff?" Maddox leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "So, how do we prove it? We show the process videos. Anyone can fake a process video these days," I said, staring out the glass window of my office onto the bustling workshop floor. I watched a seamstress carefully hand-bead the bodice of a nebula dress. A slow, wicked smile spread across my face. "We don't tell them. We show them. We bring them here." "Who?" Maddox asked. "Everyone," I said. "I spent the next 48 hours orchestrating the boldest PR move of my career. I drafted invitations and sent them via courier. I didn't invite traditional fashion journalists. I invited the skeptics. I invited the YouTubers who called us fake, the TikTok fashion critics, the industrial design influencers, and the most prominent tech bros who championed AI over human labor. I invited them to the TIB workshop for a full transparency event. 2 weeks later, 50 of the internet's most cynical voices stood in the lobby of our Brooklyn warehouse. They held their phones up, live streaming, ready for a gotcha moment. They expected a pristine showroom. Instead, I opened the heavy steel doors to the manufacturing floor. "Welcome to Take It Back," I said, my voice echoing over the hum of the machinery. "There are no showrooms here. There are no renders. Everything you see, smell, and touch is real." I let them loose. It was glorious chaos. They swarmed the floor. I watched a prominent fashion critic, a woman known for tearing apart brands, stand completely speechless as she ran her hands over the raw, color-shifting leather of a dragon-scale bag before it was assembled. I watched a tech reviewer with 2 million subscribers try to lift the steel core of a Lotus Lounge chair, his eyes widening at the sheer weight and engineering reality of it. It's actually wood," he muttered to his camera, knocking on the steam-bent ash. "I thought it was a composite plastic." "This is real wood. As real as the tree it came from," Maddox said, walking past him with a stack of blueprints. The highlight of the event was the live build. I gathered everyone around a massive cutting table in the center of the room. "You guys liked the nebula dress," I announced. "Today, we are launching our newest piece, the Gossamer Trench." It was based on an AI ad that showed a trench coat seemingly made of liquid gold that moved like water. For the next 2 hours, with 50 cameras pointed at us, Kaylee, 2 master tailors, and I built it. We didn't hide a single seam. We showed the complex internal structuring required to hold the heavy, custom-milled liquid lame fabric. We showed the reinforced stitching. When it was finished, I slipped it on. It was heavy, cool to the touch, and when I moved, it looked exactly like the impossible image on the internet. But it wasn't a trick of the light. It was the triumph of human engineering. The room erupted into applause. It wasn't polite, golf clap applause. It was the raw, genuine enthusiasm of people who had forgotten what it felt like to be amazed by physical reality. By the end of the day, the internet was flooded with thousands of videos and posts from the event. The narrative flipped instantly. TIB wasn't a scam. We were the gold standard. We were the cure to the digital rot. Sales didn't just spike, they exploded. We had to implement a lottery system just for the right to purchase our items. And then, the ultimate validation arrived. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks after the influencer event. I was in my office, going over the architectural plans for our second manufacturing facility in Chicago, when my assistant buzzed in. "Caroline, you have a walk-in." He says, "It's urgent." "Who is it?" "Norman Bergman." I stopped writing. I looked up at Kaylee, who was sitting across from me, reviewing fabric swatches. Her jaw dropped. "Send him in," I said softly. When the door opened, I almost didn't recognize him. Norman Bergman, the impeccably tailored, smug visionary who had fired me, looked like a ghost. His suit was rumpled. He had dark circles under his eyes, and the arrogant tilt of his chin was entirely gone. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, looking around my massive, beautifully chaotic office. Through the glass walls he could see the army of artisans working on the floor below. "Caroline," he said, his voice raspy. "Norman," I replied, leaning back in my plush, custom-built chair, a Maddox original. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Did your computer generate a map to my office?" He winced. "It was a beautiful thing to witness. I wanted to congratulate you," he stammered, walking forward and taking a seat across from me without being asked. "Huh. What you've built here? It's incredible. Truly. It's amazing what human beings can do when you pay them to think, isn't it?" Kaylee chimed in, not looking up from her swatches. Norman swallowed hard. "Look, I'm not going to beat around the bush. Bergman Design is in trouble," I read. I said flatly, "Class action lawsuits, a 40% drop in valuation, several retailers dropping your lines because of safety concerns, the AI models." "They hallucinated structural elements," Norman admitted, staring at his hands. "We scaled too fast. The overseas factories just built whatever the computer spit out, no matter how nonsensical it was. We have warehouses full of inventory we can't legally sell, and no creative team to fix it," I noted. "Which is why I'm here," Norman said, looking up, a desperate, familiar gleam in his eye. The salesman was trying to claw his way out of the grave. "Caroline, TIB is phenomenal, but it's niche. Your boutique, you have scaling issues. Bergman Design still has a massive global distribution network. We have infrastructure. You have a failing brand and a toxic reputation, Norman. I'm proposing an acquisition." He rushed on, ignoring me. "Bergman Design buys TIB. You come back as Chief Creative Officer. Maddox and Kaylee come back. You get full creative control, an incredible payout, and we integrate your physical prototyping with our AI generation models too." I held up a hand. The silence in the room was absolute. Down below, the rhythmic hum of a sewing machine filled the void. "Norman," I said gently, "you're confused. Confused about what? You think you're throwing me a lifeline. You think you're the big fish in this scenario." I stood up and walked over to the glass wall, looking down at my empire. "When you fired me, you told me that my process was a legacy process, that human craftsmanship was an unnecessary expense. I was wrong," he admitted quickly. "Yes, you were. But more importantly, you fundamentally misunderstood the market. You thought people just wanted the picture. You thought they just wanted the aesthetic." I turned to face him. People don't want a picture of a magic trick, Norman. They want to hold the rabbit. They want to feel the weight of it. In a world where everything on their screen is fake, authenticity is the ultimate luxury. I walked back to my desk and leaned over it, looking him dead in the eye. TIB isn't a boutique brand. Our Q3 projections place our revenue higher than Bergman Design's peak numbers from last year. We aren't niche. We are the new standard. Norman stared at me, the color draining completely from his face. Caroline, please, I'm facing bankruptcy. The board is threatening to oust me. Then let them, I said, my voice cold and final. You built a company on the premise that humans were obsolete. Now you have to live in the world you generated. I'll give you whatever you want, he begged. Name your price. I already have everything I want, Norman, and I built it with my own 2 hands. I pointed toward the door. My assistant will validate your parking. He sat there for a long moment, waiting for a punchline, a negotiation, a crack in my armor. When he realized none was coming, he slowly stood up. He looked smaller, deflated, like a balloon that had been sitting in a corner for a week. He walked out of my office without another word. When the door clicked shut, Kaylee looked up from her swatches. Well, she said, a wicked grin spreading across her face. That was better than therapy. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 6 months. A deep, rich laugh bubbled up from my chest, echoing off the glass walls. Maddox walked in a second later, holding a finished, perfectly polished walnut chair leg. Did I just see Norman Bergman crying in the elevator? Maddox asked, looking confused. He was just leaving, I said, walking over and throwing my arms around Maddox's shoulders, pulling Kaylee in for a hug. I looked out over the workshop. The vibrant fabrics, the gleaming wood, the steady, capable hands of the people who brought imagination into the physical world. We had taken the coldest, most soulless parts of the internet and turned them into something beautiful. We had taken our dignity back. We had taken our industry back. All right, back to work, I said, pulling away and smiling at my partners. We have a lot of promises to keep.
Again, and again, and again, you keep coming back to me, so don't blame me for calling you mine. Modern Queen Tales presents I Refuse to Leave You. Chapter 1, The Interview. The walls of the Blackwood Penitentiary were as cold and unyielding as the iron bars that kept me inside them. It was 1927, and the world outside was roaring with jazz, short skirts, and a frantic, desperate kind of joy that I could only glimpse through the narrow, high-set windows of the prison yard. Inside, there was only the smell of damp stone and the rhythmic clinking of the guards' keys. I sat in the visiting room, my hands folded neatly on the wooden table. Even in a drab gray uniform, I kept my posture straight. I had learned long ago that dignity was the only thing a woman could truly keep when everything else was stripped away. The man sitting across from me was not like the other reporters who had come sniffing around since my trial. Raymond Jones was young, perhaps in his late 20s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a way of tilting his head that felt unnervingly familiar. He didn't have a cigarette dangling from his lip, and he didn't look at me with the prurient curiosity I was used to. "You've been here for 3 years, Alice," he said, his voice low and melodic. "They say you haven't aged a day since the night of the murders. In fact, some of the older records that shouldn't exist, suggest you haven't aged in decades." I smiled, a slow, thin curve of the lips. "Records can be misleading, Mr. Jones, and lighting in prisons is notoriously poor for the complexion." "I think it's more than that," he said. He leaned forward, ignoring the guard watching us from the corner. "I think you're a woman who has seen the world turn many times over. I'm not here to write a scandal piece for the tabloids. I want the truth. Why did a woman like you, who seems to possess the secret to eternity, Risk it all to save a 12-year-old boy in a back alley. I looked at him for a long moment. There was a warmth in his gaze, a kindness that reached through the coldness of my heart. I hadn't spoken to anyone truly in a long time. And for some reason, I wanted him to know. I wanted to say the words out loud before the stone finally swallowed me whole. "If I tell you," I whispered, "will you believe in things that defy the laws of your science?" "I've always suspected the world was stranger than it looks," Raymond replied. I took a breath, the scent of the prison fading as I reached back into the vault of my memory. "It began with a flower," I said, "a flower that never fades." Chapter 2. The Nobleman and the Witch. The mud of the medieval village was thick and gray, clinging to my skirts as I walked the market path. I was Alice, the flower seller. I had no last name then, only a mother who lived in a hut on the edge of the woods and a talent for making things grow in the harshest winters. My mother was a woman of whispers. People came to her for poultices and charms, but they crossed the street when they saw her coming. She was a witch, they said. I only knew her as a woman who smelled of dried herbs and fierce, protective love. I sold my blooms near the gates of the local manor. One afternoon, a horse splashed through the mud, and I looked up to see a man who took my breath away. He was a nobleman, draped in furs and velvet, with a face that seemed carved from the very sunlight. "What have you there, girl?" he asked, his voice echoing in the stone courtyard. "Violets, milord, and primrose. No amaranths?" he asked, looking disappointed. "The unfading flower. My wife finds them charming, and I find their resilience poetic. I didn't have amaranths, but the next day I found a patch of them deep in the woods, near where my mother cast her circles. I cultivated them with a devotion that bordered on obsession. I wanted to see him again. I wanted him to look at me with those eyes that seemed to see more than just a peasant girl. His name was Edward. He was married, tied to a woman of high birth and cold temperament, but he began to stop by my stall every day. We spoke in hushed tones behind the stone pillars. He told me of the poems he read and the stars he watched. I told him of the secrets of the soil. The romance was a slow burn, a flickering candle in a dark age. We met in the orchards under the cover of dusk. When he kissed me, I felt as though the earth itself was shifting beneath my feet. I didn't care about his title or his wife. I only cared about the way his hand felt against my cheek. But secrets are never kept for long in small places. His family found out. To them, I was a blight, a common girl who had bewitched their golden son. They dragged me to the center of the village and declared me a temptress, a creature of darkness. As the cold steel of their daggers found my heart, I saw Edward held back by his brothers, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated agony. I died in the mud, the scent of crushed amaranths, the last thing I knew. But my mother would not let me go. Grief turned her into something terrifying. She waited until the nobleman's family celebrated their cleansing of his reputation. Using the very blood of those who had killed me, she performed a ritual that broke the laws of heaven. She sacrificed the entire lineage of that manor to pull me back from the veil. I woke up in her hut, the wound in my chest gone, replaced by a strange, humming silence in my veins. "You will never leave me again, Alice," she whispered, her hair white and her eyes wild with madness. "You are beyond the reach of time now. You are eternal." I looked at my hands. They were pale and perfect. I felt no hunger, no cold. I was a ghost that could still touch the world. But Edward was gone, killed by his own grief, or the madness that followed the slaughter of his kin. I was left alone in a world that would grow old and die around me. Chapter 3. The Painter's Muse. I told Raymond about the centuries that followed, how I learned to move from city to city, changing my name, watching empires rise and fall like the tide. I learned to hide the fact that I did not age. I became a master of shadows. The story moved to the Renaissance. I was in Florence, a city of light and color. I had taken the name Alessandra, and I found myself drawn to the studios of the great masters. That was where I saw him again. He was not Edward, but he had Edward's eyes. He was a painter named Carlo, a man of mercurial temper and brilliant vision. He was married to the daughter of a powerful merchant, a marriage of contract rather than heart. I walked into his studio one morning, carrying a bouquet of amaranths. The moment our eyes met, the air left the room. I became his primary subject. He painted me as a goddess, as a saint, as a sinner. Our affair was sordid and passionate. We stayed up until dawn, talking of art and the soul. He told me he felt as though he had known me in a dream of mud and horses and a life cut short. "Let us run away," he pleaded one night, his hands stained with oil paint. "To the Americas, to somewhere the names of our families carry no weight. I cannot breathe in this house with a woman I do not love, while you exist in the light." We plotted our escape. We had a carriage waiting at the city gates. I had packed my few belongings, including a dried amaranth from that first meeting. But the merchant's family was faster than us. His wife's brothers were men of violence and pride. They wanted blood. They ambushed us at the studio. As the swords pierced us both, Carlo reached for my hand. "In the next one," he gasped, his blood mingling with the red paint on the floor. "I will find you again." I watched him die. And then I died. But for me, death was only a temporary sleep. I woke up on the cold floor of the studio 3 days later, the guards having left my corpse to be cleared by the plague carts. I walked out into the Florentine night, my heart a leaden weight, and moved on once more. Chapter 4. The Boy and the Alleys. Raymond Jones was silent as I finished the second part of my tale. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound folder. He opened it and slid an old, cracked painting across the table. It was a portrait of a woman in Renaissance dress holding a single amaranth. It was me. The likeness was undeniable. "I found this in an estate sale in London," Raymond said. "The artist is listed as unknown, but the eyes, they're the same eyes I'm looking at now." I touched the surface of the painting. Carlo was always better with light than he was with labels. "Tell me about the boy," Raymond said softly. "The one you're here for." I leaned back, the memory of just 4 years ago rushing over me. I was living in a tenement in New York, working as a seamstress. I kept to myself, a ghost in a city of millions. Then, he appeared. He was a 12-year-old boy, dressed in clothes that were slightly too large for his thin frame. He had a maturity in his gait that didn't match his age. He found me as I was walking home from the factory. He didn't say a word at first. He simply walked up to me and held out a single, fresh amaranth flower. My heart nearly stopped. "Where did you get this, child?" "Grew it myself. I remembered you liked them," the boy said. His voice was high, but his cadence was that of an old soul. "It took me a long time to find you this time, Alice. The world is much bigger now." I stared at him, terrified and hopeful. "Who are you?" "I don't have all the words yet," he said, frowning. "It's like trying to remember a song you heard a long time ago." But I knew I had to find the lady with the flowers. I knew I had to tell her I didn't leave her. Before I could ask him anything else, a black car screeched to a halt at the end of the alley. 3 men jumped out. They weren't looking for me. They were looking for him. They called him by a name I didn't recognize, a name of a wealthy shipping family. It was a kidnapping for ransom. They grabbed him, throwing him toward the car. The boy screamed for me. In that moment, centuries of repressed rage and protective love boiled over. I wasn't just a seamstress. I was a creature brought back by blood and witchcraft. I was the woman who had lost her lover twice. I would not lose him a 3rd time, especially not when he was so small and vulnerable. I used my bare hands and a heavy iron pipe I found in the trash. I was a blur of movement. I didn't feel the knives they tucked into my ribs, or the blunt force of their blows. I killed them, all 3 of them. I tore them apart to get to that boy. When it was over, I stood in the red-stained snow, breathing hard. The boy looked at me, not with horror, but with a profound, sad recognition. "You saved me," he whispered. The police arrived minutes later. I didn't fight them. I sat by the boy's side until they took him away. I was covered in blood that wasn't mine, and wounds that were already starting to knit together beneath my skin. I was sentenced to life. The world saw a mad woman, a butcher. I saw a chance to finally pay the price for the lives my mother had taken to bring me back. Chapter 5. The Riot. "And that is my story, Mr. Jones," I said, the light in the visiting room beginning to dim. "I am a woman out of time, waiting for a man who keeps changing his face." He reached out and placed his hand over mine. His skin was warm. "You don't have to wait anymore," he said. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the prison. The floor buckled, and the sound of shattering glass echoed through the halls. Alarms began to blare, a frantic, high-pitched wailing that signaled total chaos. "What is happening?" I cried, standing up. "A distraction," Raymond said, his voice calm amidst the screaming. The guard in the corner moved toward us, reaching for his holster, but Raymond was faster. He pulled a heavy brass paperweight from his bag and struck the man with clinical precision. As the guard slumped to the floor, Raymond began stripping off the man's jacket. "Put this on," he ordered, tossing me a second uniform he had somehow concealed in his oversized briefcase. "Raymond, what have you done?" "I've spent the last 3 years planning this, Alice. Every cent of the Jones inheritance, every contact I made as a reporter, it was all for this moment. There's a riot in cell block D. The guards are occupied. We're leaving." I didn't hesitate. I pulled the trousers over my skirt and jammed the cap down low over my eyes. We moved through the smoke-filled corridors. It was a symphony of madness, prisoners sprinting past, the smell of burning mattresses, the distant pop of tear gas canisters. Raymond knew the layout perfectly. He led me through a service tunnel I hadn't even known existed. We emerged into the crisp night air, a mile away from the prison walls where a black Duesenberg sat idling in the shadows. He didn't stop until we were miles away, parked on a cliff overlooking the Hudson River. The city of New York sparkled in the distance, a crown of electric jewels. I turned to him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Why? Why would you throw your life away for a prisoner? You're a successful man, Raymond. You have a future." Raymond looked out at the water. "I told you. I've been trying to remember the song. When I was 12, it started as a hum. After you saved me in that alley, the melody finally became clear." He turned to look at me, and in the moonlight, I saw the nobleman. I saw the painter. I saw the boy. "I am the man who loved the amaranths," he said softly. "I am Edward. I am Carlo. I am the boy whose life you bought with your freedom." I started to remember my past lives during my childhood, but the memories were fragments. Until I saw you again. That's why I searched for you. That's why I became a reporter, to find the woman the world forgot. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I touched his jaw. You came back. I refuse to leave you, Alice, he said, echoing a sentiment that had spanned centuries. I've spent every lifetime finding you, and every death losing you. But this time I'm the one who gets to save you. We sat in the silence of the car, the weight of the ages finally lifting. But as I looked at him, I saw the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. He was human. He was aging. I was not. You know what this means, I whispered. You will grow old, and I will still be this. Raymond smiled, a bittersweet, beautiful expression. Then I will love you until my last breath, and then I will go and find a new body, and I will come back and find you again. It's what we do, isn't it? We stayed together for 40 years. We lived in a small house in the Swiss Alps, then a villa in Spain. I watched the gray touch his hair. I watched his hands, once so steady with a paintbrush or a pen, begin to shake. I loved him through every wrinkle, every slowed step. When he died in 1967, he went peacefully, holding my hand. See you soon, Alice, he whispered. And I, the eternal wanderer, went back into the shadows to wait. Epilogue. Paris, 21st century. The 21st century was a world of glass and light, of pocket-sized computers and a pace of life that made the roaring 20s look like a funeral procession. I lived in a quiet apartment in the Marais, passing the time by restoring old books and tending to my roof garden. One morning, a messenger arrived at my door. He handed me a thick, cream-colored envelope. Inside was a note with a time and a place, an exclusive restaurant overlooking the Seine, and a single, perfectly preserved amaranth flower. I dressed with shaking hands. I chose a dress of deep crimson, the color of the flowers that had defined my life. I walked into the restaurant. It was a place of polished brass and white linens. At a table by the window, a young man was sitting, looking out at the river. He was perhaps 25, dressed in a sharp Italian suit. As I approached, he turned. The face was new. The hair was darker, the build more athletic. But when he looked at me, the world stopped spinning. The eyes were the same. The soul behind them was ancient and familiar. He stood up, a slow smile spreading across his face. You're late, he said, his voice a rich, modern baritone that still held the echo of a nobleman's command. I sat down across from him, my eyes stinging with tears I hadn't shed in decades. I had to find the right dress. He reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was strong and certain. I told you I'd find you. It took a little longer this time. I had to grow up first. You always did like to make an entrance, I teased, the weight of the centuries finally feeling light as air. I'm the man who never leaves, he said, leaning forward. And you're the woman who waits. Shall we order? I hear the wine is excellent in this century. I looked at him, my lover, my friend, my eternal companion. The sun set over Paris, casting long golden shadows across the table, but for us, the light was only just beginning. Yes, I said, squeezing his hand. Let's stay a while.
If you enjoyed this quick escape, hit the subscribe button for new stories twice a week. Until then, I'll see you at the next flip of the pages.